Listen to the wind as it sweeps across the wet earth, carrying with it the quiet sighs of 100,000 waiting men. The earth is breathing. It is the spring of 1943, and across the vast, rolling expanse of the Russian steppe, the bitter winter snows have finally surrendered. They weep into the dark, fertile soil, turning the hard, unyielding ground into a seemingly endless ocean of thick, brown clay. They call it the Rasputitsa, the time without roads. It is as if the earth herself has decided to intervene, wrapping the scarred landscape in a soft, muddy embrace that brings all the roaring machines of men to a quiet, breathless halt. In this forced pause, a strange and fragile stillness settles over the front lines. The heavy guns have fallen silent. The sky, for so long painted with the gray, violent smoke of winter, clears to a pale, washed blue. And in the damp, timber-lined dugouts these great plains, men finally have the time to sit, to breathe, and to remember who they were before they put on their heavy uniforms. Let us look closely into one of these deep dugouts, hidden beneath the gentle swell of the earth. The air inside is heavy, smelling of damp wool, strong, dark tobacco, and the sweet, raw scent of the warming mud. In the dim, golden light of a flickering candle, a young German soldier sits with a stub of a pencil and a crumpled, precious piece of paper. His hands, rough and stained with the grease of a machine he hasn't been able to move in weeks, are remarkably gentle as he presses the delicate lead to the page. He is writing to his mother. He does not write of grand, sweeping strategies, nor does he mention the names of distant generals. He writes, instead, about the small, stubborn green shoots that have begun to push their way through the mud near the entrance of his bunker. He writes about how the morning mist, clinging to the hollows of the steppe, reminds him of the soft fog that would roll off the river near their home in Bavaria. He writes that he is eating well, and that he is safe, a gentle, necessary lie designed to soothe a mother's anxious heart. But beneath his comforting words, there is a quiet, throbbing ache. It is the immense weight of the waiting. Every man in that dugout feels it pressing down upon them. They watch the sun trace its daily, indifferent arc across the immense, unbroken horizon, and they know that with every passing day, the deep mud is slowly drying. The enforced peace is slipping away, drop by evaporated drop. The summer is coming. And with the summer will come a storm unlike any the world has ever seen. It is a secret they all carry, heavy in their chests, the silent premonition of the fire that awaits them when the earth finally hardens enough to bear the weight of steel. Just a few miles away, across the silent, shimmering sea of spring mud, another young man sits in the quiet cool of the fading evening. He is a Soviet soldier, barely out of his teenage years, wrapped tightly in a faded, heavy greatcoat that has seen far too many freezing winter nights. He is not writing. He is simply listening. He listens to the gentle rustle of the wind as it moves through the tall, dry reeds. He holds a small, battered tin cup of hot tea in his cold hands, closing his eyes as he lets the radiant warmth seep into his stiff fingers. Beside him, an older comrade is softly playing a small wooden flute, breathing out a sad, sweet melody that floats weightlessly over the empty, bruised fields. The young Soviet boy looks up at the stars as they begin to prick through the violet canopy of the twilight sky. He wonders, in the quiet, protected sanctuary of his own mind, if the boys in the trenches across the valley are looking up at those exact same stars. They are separated by invisible lines drawn on distant maps, by language, by a conflict that feels older than time itself. Yet, in this singular, fragile moment of early spring, they are united by the very same sky, the very same fear, and the very same mud. He reaches deep into the pocket of his coat and touches a smooth, painted wooden nesting doll. His little sister had pressed it into his hand before he boarded the crowded train so many months ago. The bright paint is worn away in spots from the constant, comforting rubbing of his thumb. It is his tether to a world of soft beds, warm stoves, and laughter, a world that feels like a beautiful, fading dream. The days stretch endlessly into weeks, and the waiting becomes a physical presence, wrapping around the men like a heavy woolen blanket. It is a deeply deceptive peace. The silence is not empty, it is thick and vibrating with the unseen movement of history. Under the protective cover of darkness, far behind the front lines on both sides, the trains are moving. The soldiers hear the low, rhythmic thumping in the distance in the dead of night. It is a sound felt more in the soles of their boots than heard with their ears. They know those trains are bringing more men, more iron, more fuel for the coming conflagration. The mighty engines of war are gathering their breath. Yet, out here in the quiet, muddy fields, life stubbornly insists on carrying on. A stray dog wanders slowly into a German encampment, its ribs showing clearly through its matted, damp fur. The animal does not know about borders, or flags, or ideologies. It only knows the sharp ache of hunger. A soldier, the very same boy who was writing the letter to his mother in Bavaria, reaches into his meager rations. He breaks off a piece of his hard, dark bread and tosses it gently to the animal. The dog catches it, swallows it whole, and wags its tail tentatively. For a brief, shining moment, the soldier is not a cog in a vast military machine, he is just a boy in a field, feeding a hungry dog. It is a tiny beacon of normalcy in a landscape heavily scarred by trenches and tangled barbed wire. These small, fleeting moments of humanity are the quiet rebellions of the soul against the overwhelming, faceless machinery of war. Across the way, in a damp subterranean hospital ward, a Soviet nurse sits by the warm glow of a flickering lantern. She is carefully mending the torn sleeve of a sleeping soldier's tunic. Her eyes are heavy, rimmed with the deep shadows of too many sleepless nights, but her hands remain steady, graceful, and precise. As she sews, she hums a soft lullaby from her childhood, a gentle song about a white birch tree swaying peacefully in the summer wind. The exhausted soldiers sitting nearby close their eyes and let the soothing melody wash over them. In her quiet song, they hear the voices of their wives, their mothers, their daughters. They are reminded of exactly why they are sitting in the damp, cold earth, why they must face the terrible summer that is creeping toward them. It is not for glory. It is for the quiet, desperate hope that one day, the birch trees will sway in peace once more, and they might be there to see it. Even the officers, tucked away in their slightly warmer tents, feel the crushing weight of the ticking clock. They stare out over their maps, illuminated by the soft light of kerosene lamps. The maps are covered in blue and red lines, but in the quiet of the night, those lines blur. The commanders look out the flaps of their tents toward the dark horizon, knowing that the names on their lists are not just numbers, but sons, brothers, and fathers. They, too, are trapped in the amber of this spring pause, powerless to stop the turning of the season. They write their own letters home, their hands trembling slightly in the cool night air, masking their own private dread beneath words of duty and resolve. As the weeks slowly turn, the sun grows noticeably warmer. The muddy lakes that covered the steppe begin to shrink, leaving behind cracked, dry earth. The Rasputitsa is ending. The fragile, beautiful truce of spring is breaking apart, clod by dry clod. The soldiers watch the changing landscape with a heavy, sinking feeling in the pit of their stomachs. They walk out into the morning air and touch the drying soil, testing its firmness beneath their boots. It is becoming hard. It is becoming hard enough to support the terrible weight of a tank. Hard enough to bear the crushing weight of a war. The final letters of spring are gathered up. They are carefully folded, tucked into envelopes, and placed into canvas bags, sent westward and eastward on the backs of trucks and trains. These delicate pieces of paper carry the love, the profound apologies, and the silent fears of thousands of men, traveling to homes they may never see again. Rifles are cleaned one more time, the sharp, metallic smell of the gun oil contrasting strangely with the sweet, drifting scent of the blooming wildflowers. The quiet nights are no longer spent in peaceful rest. They are spent lying awake, staring up at the wooden beams of the dugouts, listening to the heavy, anxious breathing of the men beside them. There is a profound, shared loneliness in this final waiting. Even when surrounded by thousands of comrades, packed tightly into trenches and bunkers, every man is ultimately alone. They are alone with their own memories, their own quiet prayers, their own silent, desperate bargains with whatever God they hold dear. They are caught in the long, deep breath before the plunge, the terrifying, suspended moment before the great wave crashes against the shore. The shadow of the summer stretches out across the east, growing longer and darker with each passing day, slowly swallowing the gentle, forgiving light of the spring. So let us leave them here for now, in this lingering, beautiful twilight, bathed in the soft, deceptive peace of the drying steppe. Let us honor their quiet moments of reflection, the gentle scratch of the pencil on paper, the shared warmth of a cup of tea, the soft, melancholy melody of the wooden flute. For tomorrow, the sun will rise higher in the sky. The earth will turn to dust beneath the treads of 1,000 machines. And the fragile silence will finally, permanently, be broken. But tonight, there is only the wind, sweeping across the vast and lonely land, carrying the quiet sighs of 1,000,000 waiting men. There is a sound that haunts a soldier far more than the sudden, terrible crack of a rifle. It is the slow, heavy, relentless dripping of empty time. The vast plains of the Russian steppe have shed their dark, wet coats of spring mud. The earth, once a thick, impassable ocean of clay, has baked under the ascending sun, turning into a hard, cracked crust that stretches out to touch the edge of the sky. The wild grasses have grown tall and green, swaying in the warm, dry breeze like the surface of a gentle, emerald sea. The world is ready. The stage is set. But the order to move does not come. Days fold quietly into weeks, and weeks stretch agonizingly into months, catching the men of the German army in a strange, suffocating web of psychological limbo. Down in the deep, earthen dugouts that scar the landscape, the air is thick and still. The men sit in the cool shadows, hidden from the blinding glare of the afternoon sun, waiting for a tomorrow that always seems to be delayed. They are told by their commanders, and voices that try too hard to sound confident, that they must be patient. They are waiting for new machines, they are told. Magnificent beasts of steel and iron are rolling off the assembly lines far away in the homeland, machines so powerful they will guarantee a swift and painless victory. But to a young man sitting in the dirt, thousands of miles from the soft bed of his childhood, the promise of new metal offers very little comfort. He knows, with the quiet, ancient instinct of the infantryman, that wars are not won by machines alone. They are paid for in the currency of bone, and breath, and blood. Let us sit quietly beside a soldier named Elias. He is young, though the dust and the deep lines around his eyes make him look like a man who has lived a dozen lifetimes. He sits cross-legged on a woolen blanket, his back resting against the rough timber wall of the trench. In his hands, he holds a small, dull knife and a block of pale wood. He is carving. He does not know what the shape will eventually be. He simply shaves away tiny, delicate curls of wood, watching them fall softly onto his canvas trousers. The rhythmic, scraping sound of the blade is the only noise in the bunker. It is a desperate attempt to anchor his mind to the present moment, to keep his thoughts from drifting across the wide, empty fields that separate him from the unseen enemy. Elias used to write letters every evening. He used to fill pages with vivid descriptions of the landscape and hopeful promises of his swift return. But as the delay stretches on, his words have slowly dried up, evaporating like the morning dew beneath the summer sun. What is there left to say? He cannot tell his family that he is advancing, for he is entirely still. He cannot tell them he is safe, for the silence outside is heavier and more menacing than any artillery barrage. So, he writes nothing. He just carves, paring away the wood, wishing he could pare away the heavy, suffocating weight of the waiting just as easily. This weight presses down on every man along the line. It is not a physical burden, like a heavy pack or a crate of ammunition, but a quiet, invisible stone resting squarely on their chests. It makes it hard to draw a deep breath. In the summers that came before, these men were used to moving like a swift, unstoppable wind. They were told they were invincible, a tidal wave of boots and tracks that would sweep across the continent. And for a time, they believed it. But here, tethered to the baked earth day after day, that brilliant, blinding legend of their own invincibility begins to gently fracture. They sit in the tall grass and listen to the wind. It whispers through the rusted tangles of barbed wire, creating a low, mournful hum that sounds like a choir of forgotten ghosts. As they look out toward the eastern horizon, they know they are not alone. They can feel the presence of the Soviet army out there, hidden beneath the earth, waiting just as they are waiting. But the men in the German trenches know a terrible truth: time is not a neutral friend. Every day they sit idle, waiting for the promised steel behemoths to arrive. The enemy is digging. In the quiet hours of the night, when the heat of the day finally releases its grip on the soil, the sentries stand at their posts, staring into the dark. Through the stillness, they can sometimes hear faint, rhythmic sounds carrying on the breeze. The muffled thud of a pickaxe hitting clay. The faint scrape of a shovel. The distant, rumbling echo of a train bringing more supplies to the other side. With every passing hour, the enemy is building deeper trenches, laying thicker fields of hidden mines, and turning the gentle folds of the earth into an impenetrable fortress. The German soldiers listen to these distant sounds, and a quiet, profound dread begins to pool in the pit of their stomachs. They are giving their enemy the greatest gift of all: they are giving them time. The older veterans, the men who survived the bitter, freezing horrors of the previous winters, are the quietest of all. They sit together, sharing a carefully hoarded cigarette, passing it back and forth so that the glowing ember briefly illuminates their tired, shadowed faces. They do not boast of past victories, nor do they speak of the grand strategies drawn up by generals in comfortable, distant rooms. They simply look up at the pale, indifferent moon and shake their heads. They understand the rhythm of war, and they know that this long, unnatural pause is a violation of that rhythm. They feel the momentum slipping through their fingers like the dry, powdery dust of the steppe. Doubt, once a rare and deeply hidden thing, begins to bloom in the trenches like a stubborn, silent weed. It creeps into the conversations shared over lukewarm tins of soup. If the army is truly invincible, a young private whispers to his friend, why must we wait for new tanks? If we are so strong, why do we hide in these holes while the sun burns the sky? The friend has no answer. He only offers half of his ration of hard biscuit, a small, unspoken gesture of comfort in a world that has stopped making sense. These small moments of kindness become the fragile pillars that hold up their crumbling morale. A medic, his supplies neatly organized 100 times over, spends his afternoon carefully rewrapping the blistered feet of a courier who has walked miles along the trench line. A sergeant, gruff and weathered, pretends not to notice when a young recruit quietly weeps in his sleep, dreaming of a mother he fears he will never see again. They share their meager water rations, letting the warm, metallic-tasting liquid soothe throats parched by the constant, blowing dust. They share faded, dog-eared photographs of smiling girls in summer dresses, passing the worn paper from hand to hand as if touching the image might somehow transport them back to a world of light and peace. But as the month of June drags on, the heat becomes a physical adversary. The sun beats down upon the steppe without mercy, turning the inside of the metal vehicles into sweltering, unbreathable ovens. The men shed their heavy tunics, their skin burning and peeling in the fierce light. Millions of flies swarm in the stagnant air, an endless, maddening buzz that provides a constant, irritating soundtrack to their confinement. The psychological toll of the delay begins to manifest in a deep, bone-weary apathy. Men who once polished their boots every morning now sit motionless, staring blankly at the dirt walls of their bunkers. They stop looking at their watches. Time has lost its meaning. There is only the blinding light of the day, and the cool, terrifying expanse of the night. They are caught in a liminal space, trapped between the lives they left behind and the violent storm they know is coming. It is a unique kind of torture, to know that you are standing on the very edge of a precipice, to feel the gravel slipping beneath your boots, and yet to be forbidden from taking the final step. Strangely, as the delay stretches to its breaking point, a quiet, melancholic resignation settles over the men. They no longer talk of a swift victory. They no longer dream of marching proudly through foreign squares. They only wish for the waiting to end. The anxiety of anticipation has become a burden heavier than fear itself. They find themselves almost longing for the artillery to finally shatter the silence, longing for the roaring engines and the blinding smoke, simply because it will mean the paralyzing spell of limbo is broken. Elias, the young soldier with the pale wood, finally stops carving. He looks down at his hands, calloused and covered in fine, white dust. The block of wood in his lap is no longer a formless block. It has become a small, perfectly smooth bird, its wings folded tightly against its sides, resting quietly. He runs his thumb over the gentle curve of its back, feeling the quiet beauty of a thing he has brought into existence in the midst of so much impending destruction. He gently places the wooden bird into the deep pocket of his trousers, resting it against his heart. He leans his head back against the dirt wall and closes his eyes, listening to the wind as it sighs through the tall, yellowing grass above him. The sun is beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the vast sky in bruised shades of violet, orange, and deep, blood red. Another day has passed. Another day of silence. Another day of waiting. The heavy weight settles a little deeper into his chest, a silent, constant companion in the dark. He does not know when the order will come. He only knows that tonight, beneath the canopy of distant, uncaring stars, he is still a boy sitting in the dirt, caught in the long, tragic shadow of a war that is holding its breath. Beneath the pale, silver glow of the moon, the earth does not sleep. It is shaped, handful, by the tired hands of mothers and grandfathers. While the armies of iron and steel wait in the stifling, breathless heat of the day, the true guardians of the steppe emerge in the cool, merciful embrace of the night. Across the vast, rolling plains, a different kind of army has gathered under the canopy of the stars. They wear no uniforms, and their shoulders bear no shining medals. They carry no rifles. They are the women with shawls wrapped tightly against the midnight chill, the elderly men with stooped backs and quiet eyes, and the children, too young to march to the front but old enough to understand the heavy, unspoken weight of survival. As the sun dips below the horizon, taking the brutal heat with it, they walk out from their modest villages, stepping softly into the endless fields. They have come to dig. Listen to the rhythm of the night. It is not the roar of engines or the sharp crack of distant artillery. It is a soft, continuous rustle. It is the rhythmic, heartbeat thud of 1,000 wooden-handled spades slicing into the dark, fragrant topsoil. It is the gentle scrape of metal against clay, the quiet, labored breathing of a people pouring their very essence into the land that bore them. Mile after endless mile, across valleys and over gentle hills, they are carving a vast, intricate labyrinth into the flesh of the earth. They are building a fortress of dirt and shadow, a silent declaration of love for their home, written in the deep, dark trenches that wind like veins across the countryside. Let us walk quietly among them, stepping lightly over the mounds of freshly turned earth. The smell here is rich and ancient, the scent of damp soil, crushed roots, and the sweet, grassy perfume of the summer steppe. Here is a woman named Dilena. She is a mother, though her children are far away now, swallowed by the vast, turbulent tide of the war. Her hands, once soft and used to the delicate work of mending clothes and kneading bread, are now rough, cracked, and covered in thick, dark blisters. Yet, she does not stop. She drives her spade into the earth with a steady, rhythmic grace. With every shovelful of dirt she lifts and throws to the side, she whispers a silent prayer. She is not digging a trench for a faceless army, she is digging a cradle. She imagines, with the fierce, protective love only a mother knows, that the deeper she digs, the safer some other mother's son will be when the terrible storm of fire finally breaks. The earth she moves is a blanket she is pulling up over the shoulders of her country. Next to her, swinging a heavy iron pickaxe with slow, measured strikes, is an old man named Grigori. His face is a map of deep wrinkles, weathered by 70 winters on these plains. He remembers other wars, other times when the horizon burned and the world seemed to fall apart. But he has never seen anything like this. His bones ache with a deep, persistent cold, even in the warmth of the summer night. But his eyes are clear, shining with a quiet, unbreakable dignity. He does not strike the ground in anger. He strikes it with purpose. He knows this soil. He has plowed it, planted seeds in it, and harvested its golden wheat. He knows its moods, its textures, the way it yields to the blade and the way it sometimes stubbornly resists. Now, he is asking the soil to do something it has never done before. He is asking it to become a shield. Grigori pauses, leaning heavily on the smooth wooden handle of his pickaxe to catch his breath. He reaches into the pocket of his worn coat and pulls out a small, faded handkerchief. He wipes the sweat from his brow and looks down the long, winding line of the trench. In the silver moonlight, he sees hundreds of silhouettes, bending and rising in a silent, beautiful choreography. It looks like a slow, mournful dance. There is no shouting here, no barking of orders. The work is guided by a profound, shared understanding. They do not need to speak to know why they are here. The wind, rustling through the tall, dark stalks of the nearby sunflower fields, speaks for them. It carries the echoes of the lives they are trying so desperately to preserve. Small moments of quiet heroism unfold in the darkness, unnoticed by the grand sweep of history, but deeply felt by those who share them. A young girl, barely 10 years old, walks carefully along the edge of the trench. She is carrying a heavy wooden bucket filled with cool, fresh water from the village well. The bucket bumps against her small legs, splashing water onto her bare feet, but she balances it with a fierce, determined concentration. She stops beside Ailina and holds out a battered tin cup. Ailina drops her spade, takes the cup with trembling hands, and drinks. The water is a sweet, fleeting mercy. Ailina smiles, a tired, beautiful smile, and gently touches the girl's cheek with her soil-stained fingers. In that simple exchange of water and a smile, there is a love so deep it could hold the sky aloft. Further down the line, a group of older women take a brief rest. They sit on the newly formed parapets, their feet dangling into the dark trench they have just carved. They share a small, precious loaf of dark, coarse bread, breaking off pieces and passing them from hand to hand. As they chew in silence, one of the women begins to hum. It is a low, mournful melody, a folk song passed down through generations of mothers and grandmothers. It is a song about a river that flows endlessly to the sea, carrying the sorrows of the world upon its back. The other women gently join in, their voices blending into a soft, haunting harmony that floats out over the open steppe. The song does not falter, it weaves itself into the sound of the digging, becoming part of the night itself. It is a lullaby for a wounded world, a gentle reassurance that even in the darkest of times, beauty and resilience remain. There are secrets hidden in this freshly turned soil. As the villagers dig, they are burying more than just roots and rocks. They are burying their private fears, turning their anxiety into physical labor. A young wife, whose husband is somewhere on the front lines, buries a small, folded letter she wrote to him but could never send. She tucks it carefully into a crevice in the clay wall, a silent offering to the earth, hoping that somehow, the land itself will carry her words to him. An old man buries a smooth, round stone from his garden, a talisman of the home he refuses to lose. They are leaving pieces of their hearts within the walls of these trenches, ensuring that the soldiers who eventually occupy them will be surrounded not just by dirt, but by the physical manifestation of their people's love. The sheer scale of their undertaking is almost impossible to comprehend. Without heavy machinery, without proper light, fueled only by meager rations and an indomitable spirit, they are moving mountains. They are creating a defensive network so complex, so deep, and so vast that it will soon swallow an entire invading army. But they do not think of the grand strategy. They think only of the next shovelful of dirt, the next swing of the pick, the next bucket of water. They endure the blisters that burst and bleed, the backs that scream in agony, the exhaustion that settles into their very marrow. They endure because they must. Because there is nowhere else to go. Because this wide, open sky and this dark, rich earth are the only things that truly belong to them. As the hours drift away, the deepest part of the night begins to wane. The silver moonlight slowly softens, giving way to a pale, milky gray light on the eastern horizon. The stars begin to blink out, one by one, retreating before the coming dawn. The air grows still, holding its breath in the quiet transition between night and day. A gentle ripple of movement passes down the line of workers. It is time. The sun will soon rise, bringing with it the scorching heat and the prying eyes of enemy reconnaissance planes. The villagers must disappear back into the landscape, returning to their quiet homes before the world wakes up. They gather their tools, their spades and pickaxes shining faintly with the polished wear of 1,000 strikes. They brush the dirt from their clothes, though the fine, dark dust has settled deep into the fabric, a permanent reminder of their nightly toil. Elena stands at the edge of the trench she has spent the night digging. She looks down into the deep shadows below. It is wide, and it is deep, and its walls are straight and true. She feels a profound, exhausted satisfaction. She has done all she can. She turns and begins the long walk back to her village, falling in step beside old Grigori and the young girl with the water bucket. They walk in silence, a procession of weary ghosts fading into the morning mist. Behind them, the steppe looks forever changed. The rolling, unbroken green has been replaced by a sprawling network of scars. But these are not scars of destruction, they are scars of preparation. They are the defiant marks of a people who have chosen to stand and hold the earth beneath their feet. The morning sun finally breaches the horizon, casting long, golden shadows across the newly dug trenches. The light reveals the magnitude of the secrets buried in the soil. The earth waits, silent and strong, cradling the hopes of the mothers, the dignity of the grandfathers, and the gentle resilience of the everyday heroes who gave it shape. The labyrinth is ready. The quiet defenders have done their work, leaving the stage set for the terrible, deafening acts to come. But in this soft, golden morning hour, there is only peace. There is only the wind, blowing softly over the empty trenches, whispering the forgotten songs of the night. There is a profound, unsettling silence that belongs only to a machine that has not yet learned the sound of war. Listen to the rhythmic, heavy groaning of the long trains as they roll to a gentle halt in the dark, warm hours of the night. Out here, on the vast and empty expanse of the steppe, the arrival of the railcars feels like a secret shared between the earth and the starlight. The soldiers, roused from their shallow, restless sleep, gather along the wooden platforms. They stand with their hands pushed deep into their pockets, their breath fogging slightly in the cool, midnight air. They watch as the heavy canvas tarpaulins, thick with dust and the smell of long travel, are slowly pulled back. Beneath the canvas, bathed in the pale and ghostly light of the moon, sit the newly born giants. They are massive, towering over the young men who have come to claim them. The armor is smooth and pristine, painted in the fresh, unblemished colors of faraway factories. There are no scratches on the broad, slanted steel plates. There are no dents, no scars of survival. They look less like weapons of war and more like strange, iron monuments, carved by giants and dropped gently into the soft, whispering grass of the Russian plains. For a long moment, nobody speaks. A quiet wave of awe ripples through the weary ranks. These young men, who have spent weeks living in the mud, eating cold rations, and listening to the wind, now find themselves staring up at the very pinnacle of their nation's hope. They are told that these new machines are invincible. They are told that this thick, beautiful steel will carry them safely home. A young driver named Lucas steps forward. He is only 19, though the dirt on his cheeks and the dark circles under his eyes make him look much older. He reaches out a hesitant hand and rests his palm against the cold, flat side of the hull. The metal is freezing to the touch, having soaked in the chill of the long night journey. Lucas closes his eyes. He tries to feel the strength of it, tries to absorb the quiet promise of safety that the thick armor is supposed to offer. But as he presses his skin against the unyielding iron, a tiny, quiet flutter of doubt moves through his chest. He knows, as they all know, that no matter how thick the armor is, it is still just a box. And a box can so easily become a tomb. Slowly, the crews begin to climb aboard. They hoist themselves up the sides of the tall machines, their boots slipping slightly on the fresh, factory-smooth paint. Lucas lowers himself down through the heavy, circular hatch into the driver's seat. The inside of the machine is a completely different world. It is a tight, shadowy cocoon, smelling intensely of sharp machine oil, newly cut leather, and the faint, sweet scent of pine sawdust left behind by the factory workers. Lucas settles into the stiff leather seat. He reaches out in the dim light, letting his fingers trace the unfamiliar curves of the steering levers and the cold glass of the viewing prisms. It is a beautifully crafted space, a masterpiece of design, yet it is so terribly small. When the heavy hatch above him is pulled shut, locking into place with a definitive, echoing metallic clank, the vastness of the outside world simply vanishes. Lucas sits in the dark, listening to the heavy, steady beating of his own heart bouncing off the thick steel walls. He whispers a quiet, breathless prayer into the darkness, asking not for glory, but simply that this iron shell will hold him gently and not let the fire in. Outside, in the growing light of the early dawn, the older mechanics approach the machines. They do not share the wide-eyed awe of the young crews. They are men who have spent their lives listening to the quiet murmurs of engines, men whose hands are permanently stained with grease and earth. An older mechanic named Elias stands beside one of the opened engine decks. He peers down into the complex, staggering heart of the beast. It is an intricate maze of gleaming pipes, delicate valves, and heavy, pristine gears. It is, undeniably, a work of art. But Elias feels a heavy, sinking sorrow in his stomach. He looks out across the rolling, dusty landscape of the steppe. He knows the powdery, suffocating dust that blows across these fields. He knows the thick, glue-like mud that waits beneath the grass. He looks back down at the beautiful, over-engineered engine, and he knows it is far too delicate for this brutal world. Elias reaches down with a rough, calloused hand and gently wipes a single, stray speck of dust from a polished valve. He touches the engine with the tender, melancholic care of a father adjusting the collar of a son who is about to march away. He will work. Through the nights, he promises himself. He will bleed his hands dry turning the heavy wrenches. He will stay awake until his eyes burn, all to keep this fragile, beautiful heart beating. Because he knows that the lives of the young boys sitting inside depend entirely on his tired, greasy hands. As the sun rises higher, baking the morning dew from the tall grass, the crews begin to settle into their new homes. The relationship between a man and his machine is a profoundly intimate, strangely poetic thing. The tank becomes their entire universe. It is their dining room, their shelter from the summer storms, their quiet sanctuary. In the late afternoon, when the heat of the day has finally begun to break, the men sit together in the long shadows cast by the immense steel tracks. They share small tins of meat and hard biscuits, leaning their weary backs against the road wheels. The metal, having baked in the sun all day, now radiates a deep, comforting warmth, like a stone oven in a country kitchen. A young gunner named Julian sits cross-legged in the grass, resting a small pad of paper on his knee. He is holding a stubby pencil, writing a letter to his younger sister. He stares off into the distance, searching for the right words. He does not want to tell her about the suffocating, unbearable heat inside the turret when the sun is high. He does not want to tell her about the terrifying, claustrophobic darkness when the hatches are closed. Instead, he writes about the beauty of the machine. He tells her that he has been given a magnificent, impenetrable fortress. He describes the fresh paint and the powerful, deep rumble of the engine that vibrates right through the soles of his boots. He tells her that he is safe, safer than he has ever been. He folds the letter carefully, sealing away his own private fears behind words of comfort. He knows that courage is often just the act of hiding your terror from those you love. Evening falls gently over the steppe, painting the sky in soft, bruised shades of lavender and dull orange. The wind picks up, blowing across the open hatches and whistling through the long, hollow tubes of the main guns, creating a low, mournful, humming melody. It is the whisper of the steel, a quiet, eerie lullaby that echoes across the gathering armies. The young men wrap themselves in their wool blankets. Some crawl beneath the heavy chassis of the tanks, seeking shelter from the evening dew beneath the thick floor plates. Others climb up onto the engine decks, lying flat against the metal grates, soaking up the last, lingering warmth of the engines. They press their soft, fragile bodies against the cold, unyielding iron, seeking comfort from the very thing that is meant to carry them into the fire. They close their eyes and listen to the breathing of the men around them. They listen to the quiet, metallic ticking of the cooling engines. In this peaceful, suspended moment, the machines are not weapons. They are just heavy, sleeping beasts, resting in the tall brass alongside their gentle, terrified masters. The young men place their hands on the steel, trusting it with their futures, their memories, and their lives. They drift into sleep, lulled by the quiet, settling sounds of the metal, waiting for the morning, and the storm that is sure to follow. There is a sudden, sweet weight to the wind, carrying the scent of crushed ozone and wet earth across the parched and waiting plains. For weeks, the July sun has been a heavy, unblinking eye, staring down fiercely upon the Russian steppe. It has baked the dark earth into a cracked, pale crust, turning the rolling fields into an endless ocean of suffocating, powdery dust. Every footstep, every turning wheel, has sent plumes of fine, gray chalk into the air, coating the faces of the weary men until they all looked like pale, silent ghosts. The heat had become a living thing, an invisible, crushing weight that sat upon their chests and made every drawn breath taste of dry metal and scorched grass. The young men had spent their days hiding beneath the sparse, desperate shade of their machines, their uniforms dark with sweat, their canteens always heartbreakingly light. But now, late in the afternoon, the sky begins to bruise. Deep, towering clouds, the color of slate and crushed violets, begin to roll over the eastern horizon. They move with a slow, majestic grace, swallowing the fierce sunlight and pulling a vast, cool shadow across the gathering armies. The air grows incredibly still. The birds hidden in the tall, yellow reeds stop their singing. Even the insects, whose maddening buzz has been the constant soundtrack of the summer, fall perfectly silent. The men in the deep trenches and the shallow dugouts pause their quiet murmuring and look up. They take off their heavy steel helmets. They close their tired eyes and tilt their dirt-streaked faces toward the heavens, waiting. The first drop falls. It is heavy, warm, and deliberate. It lands with a soft, audible tap against the sloping, iron shoulder of a slumbering tank. Another drop strikes the dry, thirsty earth, kicking up a tiny puff of dust before being instantly absorbed. And then, as if a great, celestial sigh of relief has been released, the sky opens. It does not come with the violent, tearing fury of a squall, but with a steady, generous, sweeping grace. A curtain of shimmering silver water falls across the steppe, washing over the miles of tangled barbed wire, the hidden minefields, and the thousands of waiting men. The sound of it is magnificent. It is a deep, resonant drumming on the canvas tents, a musical, rhythmic ringing on the cold steel of the artillery guns, and a soft, shushing whisper as it sweeps through the millions of tall sunflowers that nod heavily under its gentle weight. In an instant, the world shrinks. The vast, terrifying horizon, where the unseen enemy has been waiting, simply vanishes behind a veil of gray water. The war, with all its looming horrors and grand, terrible designs, is suspended. For this one, quiet hour, there are no armies. There are only young boys, caught in the rain, seeking shelter. Beneath a sagging, dark green tarpaulin, strung hastily between the thick treads of a transport vehicle, 3 German infantrymen sit huddled together. Their knees are pulled up tight to their chests, their shoulders touching. The air beneath the canvas is damp and smells richly of wet wool, old leather, and the sweet, dark earth. One of the boys, a quiet farmer's son from the Black Forest named Johannes, reaches into his deep coat pocket. He pulls out a small, precious tin of preserved peaches he has been saving for weeks. He pries the lid open with his pocketknife, and the sweet, bright scent of the fruit fills their tiny, canvas sanctuary. Without a word, he passes the tin to the boy beside him. They share the fruit in the dim, green light, passing it back and forth, savoring the cool, sugary juice on their dry tongues. The rain thunders gently against the tarp inches above their heads, drowning out the silence that had been tormenting them for days. "It sounds like the roof of our old barn," Johannes whispers, his voice barely carrying over the drumming water. "When I was little, I used to hide in the hayloft when it stormed. My mother would leave me there to sleep. It sounded just like this." The others nod slowly in the shadows. They do not talk of the orders they have been given, or the fire they know is coming when the earth dries once more. In the comforting rhythm of the rain, they are transported back to childhood bedrooms, to quiet porches, to the soft, safe places they left behind. The storm has built a wall of water around them, keeping the war outside, keeping them safe, just for a little while. Across the hidden fields, on the other side of the invisible line, the rain falls with the exact same, impartial mercy. The Soviet soldiers, standing in the deep, winding trenches they have carved from the earth, do not seek shelter. They stand up straight, letting the cool water wash over them. The heavy, suffocating dust that has coated their skin and hair turns to thin mud, and then washes away entirely, running in dark rivulets down their collars and soaking into their heavy tunics. An older man, a grandfather named Ilya, takes off his cap and holds it out, letting the rain pool in the worn fabric. Next to him stands a young girl, a field medic who cannot be older than 18. She is leaning back against the dirt wall, her eyes closed, a soft, beautiful smile resting on her lips as the rain cleanses her face. Ilya gently tips his cap, pouring the fresh, cool water over her hands. She laughs, a light, musical sound that is immediately swallowed by the rain, and rubs the water against her cheeks. "Drink," Ilya tells her softly, holding out his metal canteen cup to the sky. "It is the sky weeping for us. We must not waste it." The water they drink tastes of tin and pure, cold air. It is the sweetest thing they have tasted in months. It washes away the grit from their teeth and the dry terror from their throats. As they stand together in the pooling water at the bottom of the trench, the old man begins to quietly hum a song. It is a slow, rhythmic folk tune, matching the tempo of the falling rain. The young medic joins in, her voice a soft, fragile counterpoint to his deep, rumbling baritone. The melody weaves through the falling water, a tiny, defiant ribbon of humanity floating in the deluge. The machines of war, those terrible beasts of iron and steel, sit silently under the downpour, suddenly looking harmless and very small. The rain washes away the dust that has choked their engines and the dirt that has obscured their markings. The water runs in thick, dark streams down their sloped armor, dripping from the ends of their long, silent barrels. Beneath them, in the dry spaces protected by the heavy chassis, men lie on their stomachs, watching the rain hit the grass just inches from their faces. They watch the drops cling to the bright green blades of grass, trembling like fragile glass beads before finally letting go and falling into the soil. In a shallow dugout, lit only by a flickering, shielded lantern, a soldier uses his own body to keep a piece of paper dry. He is bent over, his broad shoulders serving as a roof against the dampness that permeates the air. He holds a stub of pencil, writing a letter to a wife he has not seen in 2 years. "My dearest," he writes, his handwriting slow and deliberate. "It is raining tonight. It is a warm rain, a good rain. It makes the air smell like the garden behind our house in the summer, just after you have watered the tomatoes. The men are sleeping deeply now. The sound of the water is a lullaby, and for the first time in a long time, I am not afraid. I am only thinking of you, and the way the rain used to sound against our bedroom window." He folds the paper carefully, tucking it deep into the breast pocket of his tunic, resting it securely against his heart. The rain is a great equalizer. It does not recognize the difference between the uniforms. It does not care about the flags, or the borders, or the grand, sweeping ideologies that have brought millions of men to this lonely stretch of the world. It only knows that the earth is thirsty, and that the men upon it are deeply, profoundly tired. It falls on the German mechanic trying to sleep beneath the tarpaulin, and it falls on the Soviet sentry leaning against a wet wooden post. It binds them all together in a shared, quiet experience of relief. As the evening wears on, the heavy downpour slowly softens into a gentle, lingering drizzle. The dark, towering clouds begin to drift apart, revealing the pale, ghostly glow of a watery moon fighting its way through the mist. The air is left incredibly cool, washed clean of the dust and the heat and the oppressive anxiety of the day. The steppe breathes out. The scent of the night is rich, sweet, and bursting with the smell of damp grass and fresh soil. The frogs in the newly formed puddles begin to sing, a chorus of high, clear voices that echo across the darkened plains. Water drips musically from the leaves of the trees, off the edges of helmets, and down the cold, wet sides of the sleeping tanks. The men wrap their damp blankets tightly around their shoulders. They close their eyes, listening to the soft, rhythmic dripping that surrounds them. The terror of tomorrow feels, for this one night, very far away. The mud will return in the morning, thick and unyielding. The sun will rise again, hot and merciless. The terrible silence will eventually be broken by the shattering roar of fire and steel. They all know this. The storm has not changed their fate, it has only delayed it. But tonight, they do not have to be soldiers. Tonight, cradled in the wet, fragrant arms of the earth, lulled by the soft, departing whispers of the storm, they are allowed to rest. They drift away into the deepest, most peaceful sleep they have known in months, accompanied only by the gentle rhythm of the rain and the quiet, steady beating of their own hopeful hearts. There is a specific, fragile kind of silence that falls when a deeply guarded secret is finally, softly broken in the dark. The Russian steppe is bathed in the silver, milky light of a waning moon, casting long, velvet shadows across the gently rolling earth. The dampness of the recent rain still clings to the world, turning the endless expanse of wild grass into a shimmering, dew-kissed ocean. It is midnight. The air is remarkably cool, carrying the sweet, earthy fragrance of wet soil, crushed stems, and the faint, metallic scent of sleeping machinery. To stand here in the dark, you might think the world was entirely at peace. But beneath this vast and tranquil sky, millions of men are wide awake, holding their breath, listening to the quiet ticking of the universe. For weeks, the advancing army had clothed itself in whispers. They had muffled the wheels of their supply carts with heavy rags, they had driven their iron beasts only under the protective cover of black, starless clouds, and they had ordered their young soldiers to speak only in the faintest of murmurs. They had woven a delicate cloak of surprise, believing that when the dawn finally broke, they would strike like a sudden, unforeseen lightning bolt. But tonight, as the final, precious hours of darkness slowly slip away, that comforting illusion gently crumbles. Out in the deep, untamed grass, no man's land is not empty. It is a shadowy, breathing space where the advanced scouts of both sides lie pressed against the damp earth. Let us lay down beside a young German scout named Julian. He is lying on his stomach, completely still, feeling the cold, wet moisture of the soil slowly seeping through the elbows of his wool tunic. His cheek is resting against the soft, wet grass. If he turns his head just a fraction, he can see the dark silhouettes of the Soviet trenches, a faint, jagged scar carved into the distant hillside. Julian has been out here for hours, waiting for the signal to retreat back to his own lines before the sky begins to lighten. And in those hours, he has heard the truth. Carried on the gentle, shifting night breeze, he has heard the sounds of an army that is not sleeping. He has heard the soft, unmistakable clinking of metal shovels against stone. He has heard the low, rhythmic rumbling of heavy engines warming up in the distance. He has even heard the faint, ghostly sound of a dog barking, followed by the hushed, urgent voice of a man hushing it. They know. The enemy knows they are coming. The secret has dissolved into the night air. Julian closes his eyes, and a deep, quiet shiver runs through his young frame. It is not a shiver of the cold, but of a profound, overwhelming realization. The protective shield of surprise has vanished, leaving him and hundreds of thousands of his brothers entirely exposed to the coming storm. There is no grand tactical maneuver left to hide behind. When the sun rises, it will simply be men stepping into the waiting, open eyes of other men. He presses his hand against his chest, right over his heart. He can feel it beating, a frantic, heavy thud against his ribs. It feels impossibly loud in the quiet night, so loud he fears the men across the valley might hear it. He tries to slow his breathing, taking in deep, trembling draughts of the sweet night air. He thinks of his bedroom back in Bremen, of the thick down quilt and the way the morning light would filter softly through the lace curtains. He tries to tether his mind to that gentle memory, using it as an anchor to keep himself from floating away into the terrifying, boundless dark of the steppe. Across the valley, in the deep, earthen sanctuary of a forward trench, a Soviet officer named Valentin sits with his back resting heavily against the cool dirt wall. He holds a small, tarnished silver pocket watch in his palm. The glass face is cracked, but the hands still move with a steady, impartial grace. Valentin does not need to look at the watch to know the time. He can feel the approach of the morning in his very bones. Valentin knows the secret, too. The whispered reports from patrols, the sudden, eerie quiet of the birds, the unnatural tension that makes the air feel thick and heavy, it all points to the dawn. He looks down the long, winding line of the trench. In the dim, silvery moonlight, he can see his men. They are sitting on the firing steps, or leaning against the walls, wrapped tightly in their heavy coats. Their faces are pale and drawn, illuminated by the faint glow of the stars. Next to Valentin sits a young private, a boy whose uniform is still too large for his slender shoulders. The boy is trembling, his hands clasped tightly around the wooden stock of his rifle. Valentin reaches out, his movements slow and deliberate, and places a warm, steadying hand on the boy's shoulder. He does not offer hollow promises of safety. He does not speak of grand victories or glorious sacrifice. Instead, Valentin reaches into his deep pocket and pulls out a small, slightly crushed sugar cube. He has carried it for weeks, a tiny, precious luxury hoarded through 100 cold nights. He presses it gently into the young boy's hand. "Let it melt slowly," Valentin whispers, his voice as soft as the rustling grass. "Taste it. Remember the sweetness." The boy nods, his eyes shining with unshed tears in the starlight. He places the sugar on his tongue, closing his eyes as the simple, pure sweetness blooms in his mouth. For a fleeting, beautiful moment, the terror of the coming dawn retreats. The boy is transported back to his mother's kitchen table, to the warmth of a hearth, to a world where sweetness was a given, not a rare and tragic gift. It is a tiny, quiet act of grace in a world that is preparing to tear itself apart. As the midnight hour stretches deep into the early morning, a strange, collective premonition settles over the vast landscape. The men on both sides of the invisible line look up at the sky. It is a breathtaking canopy of scattered diamonds, a river of stars flowing eternally through the black void. It is the exact same sky that arcs over the roofs of their faraway homes. It is the same sky their mothers are sleeping beneath, the same stars their children might be looking at if they happened to wake in the night. To look up into that immense, indifferent beauty is to realize just how small they all are. The grand ambitions of empires, the lines drawn on maps by men in quiet, warm rooms, none of it matters to the stars. The men lying in the damp grass and the men sitting in the deep trenches share a profound, unspoken brotherhood in this midnight hour. They are all just fragile vessels of breath and memory, caught in the relentless, turning gears of a history they cannot control. In the belly of a silent, armored machine, a German driver named Karl sits in the pitch black. The heavy hatches are closed, sealing him inside a dark, iron womb. The air is thick with the smell of grease and cold metal. He has a small, worn photograph tucked into the band of his cap. He cannot see it in the dark, but he does not need to. His fingers know the smooth edges of the paper, the slight crease where it was folded in a letter. It is a picture of his wife, standing in a garden of blooming hydrangeas. Carl closes his eyes and writes a letter in his mind, the words flowing softly in the silent space between his thoughts. "My beautiful Anna," he whispers to himself. "The night is very long, but I am not alone. I have your face in my mind, and I have the memory of your voice in my ears. They say the morning will bring a great test. I do not know if my courage will hold, but I know my love for you is stronger than the steel that surrounds me. If the sun rises and I do not write to you again, please know that in this quiet hour, in the very heart of the dark, I was at peace. I was only thinking of you." He lets out a long, slow breath, the sound of it whispering against the cold metal interior of the tank. He leans his head back against the heavy leather of his seat and surrenders to the waiting. This is the agonizing beauty of the eve of battle. It is a space where time seems to stretch and thin, where every second feels like a lifetime, and yet the hours slip away like water through desperate fingers. It is a time for final prayers, whispered not to a distant, imposing God, but softly to the earth, to the sky, and to the memories of those they love. The wind sweeps across the steppe, rippling the tall grass like the surface of a dark lake. It carries the collective sighs of 1,000,000 men. They do not want to be heroes. They do not want to be legends carved into stone monuments. They only want to see the sunset tomorrow. They want to walk back down the dirt paths of their childhoods. They want to sit in a quiet room and listen to the rain. But the earth continues its slow, inevitable rotation. The stars begin, ever so slightly, to shift toward the west. The deep, impenetrable black of the eastern horizon begins to soften, taking on the faintest, most imperceptible shade of charcoal gray. The midnight premonition has run its course. The secret is gone. The darkness is failing. The men in the damp grass slowly pull their knees to their chests. The men in the trenches tighten the straps on their helmets. They take one last, deep breath of the cool, clean night air. They hold it in their lungs, savoring the peacefulness of it, cherishing the quiet sanctuary of the dark. They let it out slowly, opening their eyes to face the pale, approaching light. The night is over. The silence is about to end. But for this one, lingering, beautiful moment, they are still alive, they are still breathing, and they are still dreaming beneath the protective canopy of the stars. Before the sky tore itself apart, the earth simply began to hum. It is the very edge of the morning, that delicate, breathless space between the fading of the stars and the rising of the sun. The Russian steppe lies perfectly still under a blanket of pale, misty gray. The long blades of wild grass are heavy with silver dew, bowing gently toward the damp soil. In the trenches and the timber-framed dugouts, hundreds of thousands of men are awake, sitting in the absolute quiet, listening to their own shallow breathing. They are waiting for the light. They are waiting for the curtain to rise. But the morning does not arrive with the gentle, warming rays of the sun. It arrives from deep within the ground. It starts as a faint, imperceptible vibration. A soldier leaning his tired head against the dirt wall of his trench feels a sudden, strange fluttering in his jaw. A young boy sitting on the floor of his dugout feels a tiny tremor pass through the soles of his boots. The water resting in their tin canteens begins to ripple, forming concentric, shivering circles. The vibration grows, climbing from the deep roots of the earth, up through the packed clay, until it fills the air with a low, bone-deep resonance. It is a terrifying, majestic shuddering, as if the entire planet has suddenly awakened and is trying to shake off the heavy, iron weight of the armies resting upon its chest. And then, the horizon catches fire. Far in the distance, miles away from the silent men in the grass, the sky erupts in a continuous, pulsing glow of furious orange and pale, blinding yellow. For a long, suspended moment, there is no sound at all. There is only the light, flickering like a monstrous, artificial sunrise, painting the undersides of the low-hanging clouds in shades of bruised purple and violent red. The men watch it in a trance, mesmerized by the terrible beauty of the false dawn. Finally, the sound arrives. It rolls across the vast expanse of the steppe not as a series of sharp, distinct explosions, but as a singular, overwhelming, physical weight. It is a heavy, continuous roar, a deep, rushing tide of displaced air and roaring thunder that presses against their chests and steals the breath from their lungs. The sky begins to weep metal. The battle has begun. Down in the deep, winding trenches carved by the tired hands of the village grandmothers just weeks before, the Soviet soldiers press their bodies flat against the earth. They do not look up. They curl themselves into tight, protective knots, seeking the deepest, darkest corners of the soil. The ground above them is tearing open, throwing massive fountains of black dirt, pulverized rock, and shredded grass high into the air. Let us sit beside a young soldier named Anton. He is curled tightly against the curved wall of the trench, his knees pulled up to his chin. He is shaking, a quiet, involuntary tremor that mirrors the violently shuddering earth beneath him. With every heavy impact above, the dirt walls of the trench sigh and shift. A continuous, dry rain of fine, powdery dust sifts down from the ceiling, dusting Anton's shoulders, his helmet, and his pale eyelashes. He looks like a statue slowly being buried in the sand. He cannot hear the man next to him. The roar of the falling artillery has consumed the entire world, replacing all other sounds with a deafening, vibrating pressure. But in the dim, dusty light, Anton feels a hand reach out and firmly grasp his arm. It is an older soldier, a man with deep lines etched into his face, whose name Anton does not even know. The older man does not say a word, for no words could survive in this ocean of noise. He simply squeezes Anton's arm. He looks directly into the young boy's wide, terrified eyes, and gives a slow, deliberate nod. In that single, shared glance, a profound and beautiful transaction takes place. It is the purest distillation of human comfort. The older man's eyes say, "I am here. You are not alone in the dark. We are still breathing." Anton feels the tight, agonizing knot in his chest loosen just a fraction. He leans his head back against the dirt wall, closes his eyes, and holds onto the firm, steady pressure of the older man's hand as if it were the only solid thing left in the universe. Across the invisible, fiery divide, the experience is exactly the same. The artillery does not discriminate. It falls with the same blind, indifferent fury on the German lines, turning their carefully constructed bunkers into shaking, groaning wooden boxes. Deep beneath the earth, a young German medic named Elias sits on a wooden crate. The heavy timber beams above his head are creaking in agony, groaning under the immense pressure of the earth shifting around them. The air in the dugout is suffocatingly thick, choked with the smell of sharp, metallic ozone, burned cordite, and the ancient, sweet smell of turned soil. The lantern swinging from the ceiling flickers wildly, casting long, frantic shadows against the walls. Elias is ignoring the noise. He has retreated entirely into the quiet, protected sanctuary of his own mind. He holds a small, deeply creased photograph in his lap. His thumb gently, repeatedly strokes the worn edge of the paper. It is a picture of an open window looking out onto a cobbled street. There is a small flower box resting on the sill, overflowing with pale geraniums. There are no people in the photograph, only the quiet, sunlit corner of a world he used to know. While the earth tears itself apart above him, Elias walks through that open window in his mind. He feels the smooth, warm wood of the window frame. He smells the peppery, green scent of the geranium leaves. He listens to the distant, musical sound of a bicycle bell ringing down the street. He breathes in the memory, slow and deep, anchoring his soul to a place of perfect peace while his body sits trapped in a cage of vibrating noise. This photograph, this tiny square of paper and light, is his armor. It is a shield that no artillery shell can pierce, a quiet defiance against the chaos trying to consume him. The bombardment stretches on, an endless, terrifying eternity compressed into a single hour. The sheer scale of the destruction is too immense for the human mind to fully comprehend. The soldiers do not think of the battle. They do not think of the war, or the grand sweeping lines on the general's maps. Their universe has shrunk to the exact size of their own bodies, to the space between their hands, to the rhythm of their own frantic hearts. They find their bravery not in grand, sweeping gestures, but in the quiet, stubborn act of simply enduring. Above them, the sun finally climbs over the horizon, but it brings no warmth. It brings no light. The dawn has been strangled in its crib. The millions of shells falling upon the steppe have thrown thousands of tons of dirt and dust into the sky. The dry summer grass has caught fire in 1,000 places, sending thick, rolling pillars of oily black smoke soaring into the heavens. The smoke and the dust weave together, forming a massive, impenetrable canopy that blots out the sun entirely. The pale, hopeful light of the morning is swallowed whole, replaced by a surreal, suffocating twilight. It begins to snow. It is not the soft, cold, white snow of the winter. It is a dark, tragic snow made of ash. Great, drifting flakes of burned grass and charred earth fall gently from the blackened sky. They drift down through the thick, amber-colored air, landing softly on the broken earth, on the heavy steel of the waiting tanks, and on the shoulders of the men hiding in the trenches. The ash falls with a strange, mournful beauty. It is the physical manifestation of the destruction, the burned remains of the peaceful morning floating gently back to the earth. A young soldier reaches out from beneath his canvas shelter and catches a piece of the black snow in his palm. It is completely weightless. He watches as it crumbles into a fine, dark powder against his skin, leaving a small, dark smudge, like a fingerprint of the storm. In this twilight of ash, the men on both sides of the line are united by a profound, overwhelming exhaustion. The trembling of the earth continues, vibrating through their teeth and rattling their bones, but they slowly begin to find a rhythm within it. They realize that they cannot fight the sky. They cannot shoot at the falling earth. They can only wait. A quiet resilience begins to settle over them, soft and persistent as the falling ash. It is the realization that the human spirit is remarkably elastic. It can be stretched to the very breaking point, terrified by the sheer, mechanical fury of the world, and yet, it can still find the strength to hold a friend's hand. It can still find the capacity to remember the smell of a geranium. It can still hold onto a tiny, fragile shred of hope in the dark. As the morning wears on, the heavy, rolling thunder of the guns begins to subtly change. It does not stop, but the deafening roar slowly shifts, transforming from a stationary wall of noise into a moving, breathing thing. The barrage is lifting, rolling forward, creeping across the steppe like a terrible, invisible curtain being drawn back. The trembling of the earth immediately around the trenches begins to ease. The thick, suffocating dust starts to slowly settle. The men, covered head to toe in gray dirt and black ash, slowly open their eyes. They look like statues carved from the earth itself, ghostly figures rising from the dust. They blink against the grit, their faces streaked with sweat and grime, entirely devoid of color in the strange, smoky light. They do not cheer. They do not speak. They simply let out long, trembling breaths, their shoulders slumping with the profound relief of having survived the impossible. The older Soviet soldier finally releases his grip on young Anton's arm. He gives the boy a gentle pat on the shoulder and turns his face upward, looking toward the narrow strip of ash-choked sky visible from the bottom of the trench. Elias, the German medic, carefully folds his photograph of the window, placing it back into the deep pocket over his heart, buttoning it securely against the approaching day. They have survived the dawn. The terrible trembling has passed over them, leaving them battered, deafened, and covered in the ashes of the world. The silence that follows is not a true silence, but it feels like a profound, merciful gift. They listen to the ringing in their ears, they feel the steady, reassuring beat of their own hearts, and they slowly, carefully, begin to stand up in the dark. The sun is hidden, the air is choked with smoke, and the true test of the summer is only just beginning. But for this quiet, lingering moment, as the black snow falls gently upon their helmets, they are alive. They have walked through the fire of the trembling earth, held together by shared glances, folded paper, and the quiet, unbreakable grace of simply holding on. There is a unique, suffocating sorrow in realizing that the very ground beneath your feet has been taught how to harbor a secret. The terrible thunder of the morning has finally rolled away, leaving behind a silence that feels heavy, bruised, and thick. The violent winds of the artillery have died down, but the air is not clear. Instead, the vast, rolling steppe has been swallowed by a sea of suspended earth. Millions of tons of fine, pulverized topsoil hang motionless in the motionless summer air, turning the daylight into a strange, glowing twilight of amber and gray. It is a labyrinth made entirely of dust. There are no walls to touch, no corners to turn, only an endless, shifting fog of powdered clay that clings to the skin, coats the eyelashes, and reduces the entire world to a few ghostly yards in every direction. Into this quiet, golden haze, the great machines of the German army begin to slowly creep forward. They were built for speed, designed to rush across open plains like an unstoppable, roaring tide. But here, in this cloudy, obscured world, their mighty engines are reduced to a low, frustrated idle. The momentum, that glorious, sweeping wave that the commanders had promised, simply dies in the dirt. The earth before them is not empty. It is sown with an invisible harvest of iron. Beneath the softly settling dust, hidden just inches below the wild grass and the broken soil, lie hundreds of thousands of mines. They rest quietly in the dark, patiently waiting. Because of this unseen danger, the iron beasts cannot roam free. They are leashed, tethered to the slow, agonizing pace of the fragile human beings walking ahead of them. Let us walk into the dust and kneel beside a young combat engineer named Felix. He is barely 20 years old, a baker's apprentice from a small, quiet village nestled in a green valley. But today, his hands are not covered in soft, white flour. They are coated in the dark, gritty soil of the Russian plains. Felix is on his hands and knees, crawling inch by inch through the tall, scorched grass. His face is pale beneath the dirt, his breathing incredibly shallow, as if he fears that taking too deep a breath might disturb the fragile balance of the world. He holds a slender steel probe in his right hand. With infinite, agonizing patience, he slides the metal rod into the earth at a shallow angle. He pushes it gently, feeling the resistance of the soil, the scrape of a stone, the tangling of a root. He is listening with his fingertips. His entire universe has shrunk down to the 3 feet of dirt directly in front of his face. The grand strategies of the war, the movements of armies, the letters from home, all of it fades away, leaving only the profound, intimate conversation between his hands and the ground. Clink. It is the softest, smallest sound. Just the gentle tapping of metal against wood, buried an inch below the surface. But to Felix, it is louder than any cannon. He freezes. His heart performs a slow, heavy roll in his chest. Slowly, so slowly it is almost imperceptible, he pulls the probe back. He brushes the loose dirt away with his bare fingertips, touching the soil with the extreme tenderness of a father brushing a stray lock of hair from a sleeping child's forehead. He uncovers the corner of a wooden box. It is a mine. Felix does not recoil. He leans closer, letting out a long, trembling breath that stirs the dust around his wrists. He reaches to his belt and pulls out a small wrench. He must now perform a delicate, terrifying surgery upon the earth. As he carefully twists the metal fuse, disarming the hidden trap, his mind drifts back to his grandfather's clock shop. He remembers watching the old man repair intricate, fragile pocket watches, his withered hands moving with steady, quiet grace among the tiny gears. Felix borrows that memory now. He borrows his grandfather's steady hands, letting the memory anchor him in the swirling dust. With a soft click, the fuse is removed. The trap is asleep. Felix closes his eyes and rests his forehead against the damp soil, just for a moment, letting the wave of relief wash over him before he must pick up his probe and crawl forward another inch. Behind Felix, looming in the dust like a slumbering dragon, sits a massive tank. Its engine rumbles with a low, rhythmic vibration that shakes the tall grass. Inside the heavy iron box sits Tobias, the driver. The heat inside the machine is unimaginable. It is the suffocating, dark oven smelling of hot oil, electrical grease, and the sour tang of old sweat. Tobias cannot see the sky. He cannot see the horizon. His entire view of the outside world is restricted to a narrow, thick glass prism no wider than his own eyes. Through this tiny slit, all he can see is the ghostly, dust-covered back of young Felix, crawling in the dirt just a few yards ahead. There is a profound, claustrophobic terror in this reliance. Tobias is encased in inches of impenetrable steel. He commands a machine of terrifying power. Yet, he is completely, utterly helpless. He cannot steer left or right. He cannot move forward. His life, and the lives of the three men sitting in the stifling dark behind him, rest entirely on the trembling fingertips of the boy crawling in the dirt. It is a forced, beautiful intimacy. They are bound together by an invisible thread in the labyrinth. Tobias rests his gloved hands lightly on the steering levers. He watches Felix uncover another mine. He sees the young engineer's shoulders slump with exhaustion. A profound wave of empathy swells in Tobias's chest. He reaches for his canvas canteen, unscrews the cap, and carefully unlatches the heavy hatch above his head, pushing it open just a few inches. "Engineer," Tobias whispers, his voice dry and raspy, carrying softly through the haze. Felix stops and turns his head. His face is a mask of gray dust, his eyes wide and startlingly bright. Tobias reaches out through the narrow crack in the armor and offers the canteen. Felix carefully stands up into a crouch, takes the metal flask, and drinks. The water is warm and tastes of tin, but it is a small, liquid miracle. Felix hands the canteen back, their dust-covered fingers brushing for a fraction of a second against the warm steel. Felix gives a small, exhausted nod of gratitude, a quiet acknowledgement of their shared humanity in this cursed place. Then, he turns his back, drops to his knees, and disappears once more into the work. The slow, agonizing creep continues. The labyrinth stretches on, seemingly without end. The earth has become a sponge, quietly and deliberately soaking up all the energy, all the momentum, and all the grand illusions of the invading army. The German forces are not being pushed back by a roaring wall of men, they are being swallowed by the patience of the soil. The psychological toll begins to settle deep into the bones of the soldiers. It is a quiet, eroding despair. To fight an enemy you can see is terrifying, but to fight the very ground you walk upon is a maddening, isolating experience. The infantrymen walk carefully in the precise track marks left by the tanks, stepping exactly where the heavy treads have flattened the grass. They look down at their boots, terrified to stray even an inch to the left or the right. The open steppe, which once looked like a grand, sweeping road to victory, now feels like a narrow, incredibly fragile tightrope. In the late afternoon, a young medic sits resting on the back deck of an idling transport vehicle. He is writing a letter to his mother on the back of an old, crumpled supply requisition form. He does not write of glorious charges or sweeping victories. "The world here is made of dust and waiting," he writes, his pencil moving slowly over the paper. "We move so slowly, Mother. It feels as though we are walking in a dream, or perhaps at the bottom of a dark sea. The earth itself does not want us here. It pushes back with a quiet, terrible strength. I watch the boys out front, digging in the dirt with their hands, and I pray for them with every breath. Please tell the girls that I miss the green of our garden. There is no green here, only the gray dust that coats our hearts. As the sun begins to lower toward the western horizon, the amber haze of the labyrinth turns into a deep, bruised violet. The heat slowly recedes, replaced by a creeping, damp chill that rises from the soil. The great machines finally bring their engines to a halt. They have moved barely a few miles all day. The mighty advance has been reduced to a stumbling, exhausted crawl. The engineers, the boys with the flower-soft hands and their grandfather's memories, finally stand up. Their knees are bruised and bleeding. Their hands are raw. They walk back toward the idling tanks like ghosts drifting through the fog. They lean their tired backs against the cooling steel tracks, sliding down to sit in the dirt they have just conquered. Tobias opens his heavy hatch and climbs out, breathing in the cool evening air. He climbs down the side of the machine and sits in the dust beside Felix. They do not speak. There is no need for words. Tobias pulls a small, slightly crushed cigarette from his pocket. He lights it, taking a slow draw, and hands it to Felix. The young engineer takes it with trembling, dirt-stained fingers. They sit together in the fading light, surrounded by the invisible maze they have survived for one more day. The dust slowly begins to settle, painting the silent machines and the sleeping men in a soft, silver coat. The earth remains quiet, holding its secrets deep within its chest. The labyrinth has not been broken, it has merely been endured. And as the stars begin to faintly prick through the clearing haze, the men close their eyes, resting gently on the cursed ground, dreaming of a world where the earth is just dirt, and the dust is only dust. To be swallowed by a forest of gold is a beautiful, eerie thing, especially when you are searching for a war you can no longer see. Imagine, if you will, a field that does not end. It rolls across the gentle curves of the earth, stretching out to the very edge of the horizon, painted in the most brilliant, breathtaking shades of summer yellow and deep, vibrant green. These are the sunflower fields of the steppe. Planted months ago by the quiet, calloused hands of village farmers, they have grown wild and untamed under the July sun. They stand incredibly tall, rising 6, sometimes 7 feet into the air. Their stalks are thick and sturdy, covered in a fine, silver fuzz, and their massive, heavy heads bow slightly toward the earth, as if locked in a permanent, silent prayer. Into this vast, golden ocean, the young infantrymen slowly walk. They step off the dusty dirt roads and push their way into the dense curtain of green leaves. Instantly, the world as they know it simply vanishes. The wide, sweeping vistas of the plains are replaced by an intricate, claustrophobic maze of stalks and shadows. The brilliant blue sky is shattered into 1,000 tiny fragments, visible only through the overlapping canopy of massive, heart-shaped leaves. Listen to the sound of their movement. It is a soft, continuous, papery rustle. The broad leaves brush gently against the rough wool of their uniforms, sliding over their heavy canvas webbing and the cold, dark steel of their rifles. It sounds like the hushed whispers of a congregation in a great, wooden cathedral. Down here, beneath the yellow canopy, the wind cannot reach them. The air is incredibly still, heavy, and thick with the sweet, intoxicating scent of warm pollen and crushed green sap. It is a dizzying, beautiful perfume that perfectly masks the scent of the war they have brought with them. A young German soldier named Thomas walks point for his small squad. He is barely 19, a city boy from the narrow, cobblestone streets of Frankfurt, and he has never seen anything like this in his life. He holds his rifle tightly across his chest, his knuckles white, but his eyes are wide with a strange, childlike wonder. The flowers tower over him, their faces the size of dinner plates, surrounded by halos of brilliant, yellow petals. Thomas takes a step forward, and the leaves close seamlessly behind him. He stops and turns around. He can hear the heavy, rhythmic breathing of his friends just a few feet away. He can hear the soft crunch of their boots on the dry soil. But he cannot see them. He is entirely alone in a sea of green and gold. A profound, isolating quiet washes over him. It is a gentle, eerie fear. There are no trenches here, no bunkers, no barbed wire. There is only the endless, shifting maze. Every shadow looks like a man, every gentle sway of a sunflower stalk looks like a phantom stepping out from the green. Thomas reaches out with a trembling, dirt-stained hand and touches the rough, hairy stem of the flower beside him. It feels so alive, so deeply rooted in the earth. He realizes, with a quiet, sinking feeling in his chest, that he is completely at the mercy of this beautiful labyrinth. If an enemy were standing just 3 feet away, shielded by the broad leaves, Thomas would never know until it was too late. They have become ghosts, wandering blindly through a harvest they did not plant. Somewhere in this very same field, perhaps a mile away, perhaps only a few hundred yards, sits a Soviet infantryman named Leviticus. Lev is a farm boy. He knows the smell of this pollen. He knows how the thick stalks yield to the gentle pressure of a hand, and how the heavy flower heads follow the slow, burning arc of the sun across the sky. To Thomas, this field is a terrifying, alien maze. But to Lev, it is a piece of home. It is a cruel, heartbreaking sanctuary. Lev is resting. He sits cross-legged in the soft, dry dirt at the base of a particularly massive sunflower, his back resting against its sturdy trunk. He has unbuttoned the top of his heavy, faded tunic, letting his skin breathe in the stifling, windless heat of the golden tunnel. Across his lap lies his rifle, but his hands are occupied with something far more precious. He holds a small, battered notebook with water-stained pages and a tiny stub of graphite. He is writing to his younger sister. "My little bird," he writes, his handwriting small and cramped, trying to save as much space as possible. "You would not believe where I am sitting today. I am hidden at the bottom of a golden sea. The sunflowers here are taller than our father. They are so beautiful and so quiet. When the sun shines through their leaves, the light turns the color of honey. I am safe here in the green shadows. The war feels like a very distant thunderstorm, rumbling somewhere over the mountains. Today, I am not a soldier. I am just a boy sitting in a garden, thinking of the way you used to weave the yellow petals into your hair." Lev pauses, gently blowing a speck of dust from the page. He looks up at the massive flower head nodding gently above him. For a moment, he allows himself to pretend. He pretends that the men searching for him in this maze are just playing a grand, childhood game of hide and seek. He pretends that when the sun goes down, they will all simply stand up, brush the dirt from their knees, and walk back to their warm, well-lit homes. He carefully folds the paper, tearing it cleanly from the notebook, and tucks it into a small leather pouch worn close against his heart. As the afternoon stretches on, the heat inside the fields becomes a physical weight. The men wander in slow, exhausted circles, their sense of direction completely erased by the identical, repeating walls of green stalks. The tension of the unseen enemy slowly dissolves into a bone-weary apathy. They are too tired to be afraid anymore. They are just incredibly thirsty and profoundly lost. Small moments of quiet humanity bloom in the hidden clearings. In a tiny, circular patch where the sunflowers have been flattened by a passing cart long ago, a German medic kneels beside a resting soldier. The soldier is not wounded by shrapnel or bullets, but by the sheer, crushing exhaustion of the summer heat. He is pale, his eyes closed, his breathing shallow and rapid. The medic, a gentle man named Hans who used to teach literature in a small country school, does not shout. He does not order the boy to stand. Instead, Hans takes his canvas canteen, unscrews the cap, and wets a clean, white handkerchief. With infinite, tender care, he wipes the fine, yellow pollen and the gray dust from the young boy's forehead and cheeks. "Rest now," Hans whispers, his voice barely louder than the rustling leaves. "Just breathe the green air. The world outside this field can wait. Nobody can find us here. We are completely hidden." He offers the boy a sip of tepid water, cradling the back of his head with a gentle hand. In this tiny clearing, shielded by a fortress of bright yellow flowers, there are no uniforms. There is no grand strategy. There is only a teacher caring for a student, a man offering a drop of water to another human being in the quiet heart of a beautiful, terrifying maze. Sometimes, the opposing sides drift so close to each other that they unwittingly share the exact same space. Thomas, still walking slowly through the dense stalks, stops suddenly. His boot has touched something soft in the dirt. He looks down, parting the broad green leaves with the barrel of his rifle. Lying in the dust is a small, carved wooden horse. It is a child's toy, smooth and polished from years of being held in a small, warm hand. It has a frayed string tied loosely around its neck. Thomas slowly drops to one knee. He looks around, his heart beating a quiet, steady rhythm against his ribs. The leaves are perfectly still. Whoever dropped this was here only moments ago. An enemy. A phantom in the gold. But Thomas does not raise his weapon. He does not shout a warning to his squad. He simply reaches down and picks up the wooden horse. He traces the smooth curve of its back with his thumb. He realizes, with a profound and sudden clarity, that the ghost who walked through this exact spot is just a boy carrying a piece of his childhood in his pocket. He is a boy with a mother, a boy with memories, a boy who is just as lost and afraid in this endless green ocean as Thomas is. Thomas gently sets the wooden horse back down in the dirt, resting it carefully at the base of a sunflower stalk. He leaves it there as a quiet offering, a silent acknowledgement of the shared humanity that connects them in the dark, even when they are supposed to be hunting one another. He stands up, takes a deep breath of the sweet, pollen-heavy air, and continues walking into the maze. As evening approaches, the character of the field begins to change. The bright, blinding yellow of the petals softens into a deep, rich amber, and then slowly darkens into shades of bruised purple and gray. The temperature drops, bringing a sudden, shivering chill to the stagnant air. And then, a beautiful, melancholy miracle happens. Millions of heavy sunflower heads, having tracked the sun across the wide Russian sky all day, slowly begin to bow. They lower their bright faces toward the cooling earth, turning their backs to the approaching night. It looks as though the entire world is falling into a gentle, morning sleep. The young men, exhausted and completely disoriented, finally stop walking. They cannot navigate in the dark. They sit down exactly where they are, dropping their heavy packs into the soft, loose soil. They wrap their wool coats tightly around their shoulders, pulling their knees to their chests. They are scattered throughout the massive field, thousands of lonely boys sitting in the dirt, separated by walls of silent, sleeping plants. They do not light fires. They do not speak. They simply lean their tired heads back against the thick, sturdy stalks and look straight up. Through the canopy of broad leaves, the first pale stars of the evening begin to prick through the violet sky. In this quiet hour, the eerie terror of the maze fades away, replaced by a profound, enveloping peace. The sunflowers stand over them like tall, silent guardians, shielding them from the wind, shielding them from the eyes of the world, and shielding them from the war that waits for them on the edges of the field. For tonight, they are safe. They are just ghosts resting in the shadows of the gold, lulled into sleep by the gentle, papery rustle of the leaves, dreaming of the soft, sweet places they used to know before they walked into the maze. To look up from the bottom of a heavy, earthen trench is to realize that heaven and hell can share the exact same summer afternoon. Down here, the world is made of heavy things. The Russian steppe is anchored by the crushing weight of iron tanks, the dense, sticky pull of the dark mud, and the bone-deep exhaustion of a million men. For days, the soldiers have walked with their heads bowed, their eyes fixed on the bruised soil, tracking the footprints of the men in front of them. Their shoulders are slumped beneath the burden of their canvas packs and their woolen coats. Gravity feels like a physical enemy, a constant, pulling force that wants nothing more than to drag them down into the dust and keep them there. But then, a new sound enters the world. It is not the violent, earth-shaking roar of artillery. It does not vibrate through the soles of their boots. Instead, it is a high, trembling hum, distant and persistent, like the buzzing of 1,000 silver bees. Slowly, the exhausted men stop their digging. They lean their heavy shovels against the dirt walls. They push their steel helmets back from their sweat-dampened foreheads, and they tilt their faces upward. The sky above the rolling hills is a masterpiece of aching, brilliant blue, scattered with a few lazy, drifting clouds that look like pulled cotton. And there, miles above the suffocating heat of the plains, a silent, breathtaking ballet is taking place. Dozens of tiny, silver specks are dancing in the vast expanse. From the ground, they do not look like machines of war. They look like minnows darting through a crystal-clear pond, catching the bright summer sun on their metallic scales. They weave and spin, climbing steeply into the heavens before diving back down in graceful, sweeping arcs. As they move, they leave behind long, beautiful ribbons of stark white vapor, tying the blue sky into intricate, temporary knots. Because they are so incredibly high, the men on the ground cannot hear the sharp rattle of the weapons. They cannot hear the grinding of the engines pushing themselves to the absolute limit. The distance filters away all the violence, leaving only the pure, mesmerizing grace of the movement. It is a pantomime of war, a silent film projected onto the dome of the world. Let us lie down in the tall, crushed wildgrass beside an older German infantryman named Thomas. His uniform is stained with the dark earth, and his hands are blistered from the long, endless marching. He rests his head back on his folded canvas satchel, crossing his arms over his chest. Beside him lies a young recruit, a boy named Leo, whose eyes are wide with a strange, detached wonder. They do not speak. They simply watch. For Thomas, the intricate dance of the Silver Plains feels like a beautiful, impossible dream. He remembers taking his wife to the theater in Munich years ago, before the world caught fire. They had sat in the dark velvet chairs, watching the ballet dancers leap and spin across the stage in absolute silence, defying gravity with effortless grace. Watching the sky now, Thomas feels that same sense of hypnotic awe. He watches two planes circle each other, a perfect, spiraling waltz, leaving a double helix of white smoke in their wake. It is so beautiful it makes his chest ache. They look so light, young Leo whispers, his voice barely carrying over the gentle rustle of the wind in the grass. It is as if they weigh nothing at all. Thomas nods slowly. He thinks about the boys sitting inside those silver specks. He imagines the freezing, pure air they are breathing, miles above the choking dust of the steppe. He pictures them encased in delicate bubbles of glass and thin aluminum, floating in a realm of absolute light. They are completely separated from the mud, the trenches, and the tangled barbed wire. For a fleeting moment, Thomas deeply envies them. He wishes he could trade his heavy boots for wings, to pull up on a lever and simply fly away from the heavy, sorrowful earth. But even a ballet must eventually come to an end. The pristine white ribbons in the sky are suddenly interrupted by a thick, dark smear of oily black smoke. One of the silver minnows has faltered. It breaks away from the dance, its graceful arc turning into a slow, heartbreaking descent. The men on the ground watch it fall. It takes an incredibly long time. The burning plane does not plummet like a stone, it drifts down like an autumn leaf caught in a gentle downdraft, trailing a long, mournful veil of smoke. Behind it, from this distance, it does not look like a tragedy. It just looks like a falling star, returning quietly to the earth. Thomas closes his eyes as it slips behind a distant, rolling hill. He whispers a small, private prayer, sending it up into the blue. He hopes that the boy inside, whoever he is, whatever uniform he wears, is not afraid. He hopes that in those final, weightless moments, the pilot is simply looking at the curve of the horizon, finding peace in the vastness of the world before the ground rises up to meet him. Miles away, on the other side of the invisible, shifting lines, a young Soviet medic named Ilara sits on the wooden step of her dugout. She has been awake for 2 days, her hands stained with iodine and her back aching from bending over the low cots of the wounded. She, too, is watching the sky. As she looks up, A piece of debris from the distant dance above catches the sunlight. It flutters down from the clouds, spiraling gently on the warm thermals rising from the sun-baked plains. It takes several minutes to fall, drifting back and forth, until it lands with a soft, metallic whisper in the dry dirt, just a few feet from her worn boots. Elara stands up and walks over to it. She kneels in the dust and reaches out with careful, trembling fingers. It is a piece of torn aluminum fuselage, no larger than a dinner plate. It is painted a pale, soft blue, the exact color of the summer sky. She picks it up, marveling at how incredibly light it is. It weighs almost nothing in her hands. The metal is still strangely cold, holding onto the freezing temperatures of the high altitude from which it fell. She runs her thumb over a row of tiny, perfectly flush rivets. In this small, bent piece of metal, Elara feels a profound sense of fragile humanity. She imagines the factory workers, perhaps women just like her, in a distant city, carefully riveting this thin sheet of aluminum, painting it the color of hope, and sending it up into the clouds. It feels so delicate compared to the brutal, thick iron of the tanks that surround her. It is as if the sky itself has wept a single, metallic tear, dropping it directly into her hands. She pulls a small, ragged cloth from her pocket, carefully wraps the piece of blue aluminum, and tucks it deep into her satchel. She will keep it. When the war is finally over, she will place it on her windowsill back home, a quiet reminder of the day she held a piece of the sky in her hands. Back in the crushed wheat field, Thomas and Leo are still looking up. The hum of the engines is beginning to fade, drifting away toward the horizon as the machines burn through their fuel and turn back toward their hidden airfields. Suddenly, Leo points a shaking finger toward a patch of clear blue. "Look," he whispers. A tiny, white blossom has opened in the heavens. It is a parachute. It catches the wind, billowing out into a perfect, brilliant dome of silk. Beneath it, a tiny black figure is suspended, swinging gently back and forth like a pendulum on a grandfather clock. The pilot is drifting down, slow and peaceful, like a dandelion seed carried on a late summer breeze. All across the rolling hills, thousands of men stop what they are doing to watch the solitary figure descend. In this suspended, breathless moment, the pilot does not belong to an army. He is not a German or a Russian. He is simply a boy, dangling from a thread, utterly alone in the immense blue dome of the world. The men on the ground feel a strange, overwhelming surge of protective warmth. No one reaches for a rifle. No one shouts an order. They watch the slow, gentle pendulum swing with bated breath. They are bound to him by the simple, undeniable fact of gravity. They know that he is leaving the clean, pristine realm of the clouds and returning to the scarred, broken earth they inhabit. They silently will the wind to be gentle. They pray the silk holds strong. They hope, with a quiet, desperate sincerity, that he lands in a soft patch of tall grass, away from the wire, away from the mud. For 10 long minutes, the pilot drifts in silence. He is a bridge between the heavens and the earth, a slow-moving testament to the fragility of the human life suspended between two vast and different spaces. When he finally disappears behind the gentle swell of a tree line, a collective, silent sigh ripples across the steppe. The sky, vast and unbothered, begins to heal itself. The high-altitude winds catch the white ribbons of vapor, gently pulling them apart. The sharp lines blur, softening into hazy streaks before finally dissolving entirely back into the blue. The dark smear of smoke is carried away, stretched thin until it is nothing more than a trick of the light. Within an hour, there is no evidence that the ballet ever took place. The heavens are completely pristine once more, ancient, eternal, and perfectly untouched by the sorrows and the struggles of the men below. The sun begins to lower, casting long, golden shadows across the trenches and the sleeping tanks. The evening chill slowly rises from the damp soil. Thomas rolls onto his side, pulling his woolen coat a little tighter around his shoulders. He touches his hand to the dry earth, feeling its solidity, its permanence. He closes his eyes. He will not dream of fire or falling stars tonight. He will dream of a quiet theater in Munich, of silent dancers spinning in the dark, and of a world where men only take to the sky to touch the clouds, and never, ever to fall. The deep, heavy earth holds him close, a steady, comforting embrace, as the first pale stars emerge to take their silent watch over the resting plains. There is a profound, heavy sorrow in the hands of a man who realizes he cannot mend a broken world, no matter how hard he works. When the sun finally dips below the vast, rolling curve of the Russian steppe, taking the punishing heat of the day with it, the front lines often fall into an exhausted, uneasy slumber. The rifles quiet down. The terrible artillery ceases its earth-shattering rhythm. But miles behind that invisible line of fire, hidden in the shallow ravines and the shadows of sparse, solitary groves of birch trees, the night is vibrantly, desperately alive. Here, in the gathering dark, you will not find the grand, sweeping movements of armies. You will not find the generals with their pristine maps, nor the young infantrymen staring out into the grass. Here, you will find the invisible heroes of the war. You will find the weary, grease-stained hands that are trying, with quiet desperation, to piece back together a failing dream. The landscape is dotted with the soft, amber glow of dim kerosene lanterns. They look like a scattering of lonely fireflies against the immense, crushing blackness of the steppe. Beneath these fragile pools of warm light sit the great machines, the iron beasts that were supposed to conquer this ancient land. But they are no longer the pristine, terrifying monuments of steel that rolled off the trains just weeks ago. They are battered. They are broken. They sit in the dust with their heavy metal covers thrown open, exposing their complex, delicate hearts to the cool night air. Let us step softly into the golden halo of one of these lanterns and stand beside an older mechanic named Matthias. In another life, a life that feels like it belongs to someone else entirely, Matthias was a clockmaker in a quiet village in Saxony. He spent his days in a sunlit room smelling of lemon oil and old wood, listening to the gentle, rhythmic ticking of 100 tiny gears. His hands are thick, but his fingers possess a surprising, delicate grace. Now, those same hands are stained black with soot, engine grease, and the fine, pervasive gray dust of the Russian plains. The dust is everywhere. It is the true victor of this summer campaign. It grinds down the intricately machined parts, it chokes the breathing filters, and it settles deep into the lines of Matthias's tired face. Matthias is lying on his back beneath the massive steel belly of a transport vehicle. The earth beneath him is cool, but the metal inches above his nose still radiates the fierce, baked-in heat of the day. He holds a heavy iron wrench, turning a stripped bolt with slow, agonizing effort. Listen to the rhythm of his work. It is not the sharp, precise tick-tock of his clock shop. It is a slow, labored scraping. It is the heavy clank of metal against metal, followed by a long, soft sigh of exhaustion. It is the echo of a broken rhythm. The army was built to move like a perfect timepiece, sweeping across the earth with unstoppable momentum. But the earth has fought back, not with iron, but with endless miles of deep, suffocating dust and treacherous, hidden mud. The flawless engineering of the homeland is simply being swallowed whole by the raw, untamed vastness of the steppe. Matthias finally loosens the bolt. He lowers his heavy arms, letting them rest on the damp soil, and closes his eyes. He is so deeply tired that his bones ache with a cold, vibrating hum. He has not slept in a proper bed in months. He has forgotten what it feels like to have hands that are truly clean. Yet, he does not stop. He cannot stop. He slides out from under the machine and sits up, wiping his brow with a ragged, oily cloth. Beside him, sitting on an overturned wooden ammunition crate, is a young apprentice named Julian. Julian is barely 17. He has fallen asleep sitting straight up, his head resting against the cold steel of the vehicle's tracks, a heavy hammer still clutched loosely in his relaxed hand. Matthias looks at the boy, and a gentle, heartbreaking smile touches his lips. He does not wake him. He knows that every minute of sleep in this cursed place is a stolen, precious treasure. Matthias reaches out and gently takes the hammer from the boy's hand, setting it quietly in the dirt. He takes his own threadbare woolen coat and drapes it carefully over Julian's narrow shoulders, tucking it in against the night chill. Why do they work so hard in the dark? Why do they push their bodies to the absolute limit, bleeding their knuckles dry against the unforgiving iron? It is not for the glory of the Empire. It is not for the medals, or the marching songs, or the grand speeches echoing from the radios back home. It is for the boys. Matthias walks over to the front of the vehicle and opens the heavy driver's hatch. He leans in to check the steering levers, and his hand brushes against something soft tucked into the corner of the leather seat. It is a small, hand-knitted woolen scarf, pale blue and smelling faintly of lavender, a stark contrast to the sharp, chemical stench of the cabin. It belongs to the young driver who brought this broken machine into the camp hours ago, a boy whose eyes were wide with terror and rimmed with the exhaustion of the front lines. Matthias holds the soft wool in his grease-stained hands. He understands, with a profound and quiet clarity, that he is not just fixing a machine. He is repairing a shield. He is trying to patch together the fragile iron shell that stands between that terrified young driver and the violent storm waiting for him on the horizon. Every bolt Matthias tightens, every gear he cleans, is a silent prayer for the safe return of another mother's son. It is a desperate act of love, forged in steel and shadow. He sets the scarf back precisely where he found it, smoothing it down with a gentle hand. He steps back out into the cool night air and walks over to a small, flickering campfire a few yards away. A blackened tin pot hangs over the low flames, bubbling softly. Another mechanic, a quiet, broad-shouldered man named Dieter, sits by the fire. Dieter pours a cup of hot, dark chicory coffee into a dented tin mug and hands it to Matthias. They do not speak. The silence between them is comfortable, built on 100 shared nights of endless labor. They sit together in the dirt, sipping the bitter, scalding liquid, letting the warmth spread down into their tired chests. Around them, the camp is a shadowy graveyard of wounded giants. Everywhere they look, there are machines with broken tracks, shattered glass, and engines that have choked on the endless dust. The sheer volume of the wreckage is a quiet, devastating testament to a failing campaign. They are no longer waiting for new parts to arrive from the west, the trains have stopped coming. Instead, they must scavenge. They become mechanical surgeons, carefully removing a vital piece from a completely ruined machine to breathe a few more days of life into another. It is a slow, heartbreaking cannibalization. It feels as though the army is quietly eating itself in the dark. Dieter pulls a folded, grease-smudged letter from his pocket. He leans closer to the dim light of the lantern, reading the words for perhaps the 50th time. He does not read it aloud, but Matthias can see the softening of Dieter's eyes, the way his jaw gently relaxes. The letter is a tether, a thin, invisible thread stretching thousands of miles back to a kitchen table, to a warm hearth, to a life that feels like a fading dream. In this landscape of broken metal and pulverized earth, these fragile pieces of paper are the only things keeping their humanity entirely intact. Matthias finishes his coffee and sets the empty mug in the dirt. He looks up at the sky. The stars are brilliant, scattered across the vast, black dome like a handful of silver dust. He imagines he can hear the slow, majestic turning of the heavens. It is the only perfect rhythm left in the world. With a soft, heavy sigh, he stands up. The night is short, and the sun will be completely merciless when it returns. He walks back to the broken transport vehicle, picking up his heavy wrench once more. He leans over the engine block, bathing his hands in the warm oil, and begins to work. He works through the deepest, coldest hours of the night. He works until his muscles tremble and his vision blurs. He works with the steady, quiet resilience of a man who knows that his efforts are likely in vain, but who refuses to surrender to the darkness. He is the invisible heart of the army, beating faintly in the shadows, fueled by duty, sorrow, and a quiet, desperate hope. Slowly, imperceptibly, the eastern horizon begins to change. The absolute blackness softens into a deep, bruised indigo, and then bleeds into a pale, smoky gray. The stars begin to fade, retreating before the approaching dawn. The wind picks up, carrying the familiar, metallic scent of the waking front lines. The mechanics begin to extinguish their lanterns. The warm, golden pools of light vanish, replaced by the cold, unforgiving reality of the morning. Matthias wipes his hands one last time. He closes the heavy metal covers of the engine, locking them down with a definitive, echoing clank. The machine is not perfect. It is scarred, it is patched, and it breathes with a slight, unhealthy rattle. But it will run. It will move for one more day. The young crews emerge from their shallow dugouts, rubbing the sleep from their eyes. They walk out to their repaired machines, patting the cold steel as if greeting an old, faithful horse. The young driver climbs up into his vehicle. He looks down at Matthias, standing exhausted in the dust. The boy gives a small, tired nod of gratitude. Matthias nods back, raising a soot-stained hand in a quiet farewell. The engines cough, sputter, and finally roar to life, shattering the peaceful silence of the morning. The repaired machines slowly turn their heavy tracks, pulling themselves out of the shadows and turning their faces back toward the east, back toward the fire. Matthias stands in the swirling cloud of gray dust left in their wake. He watches them disappear into the hazy morning light until they are nothing more than dark silhouettes against the rising sun. Only then does he turn away. He walks over to the spot where young Julian is just beginning to stir from his sleep. The camp is suddenly very quiet again, empty of the roaring beasts. Matthias sits down heavily in the dirt, leaning his back against a wooden crate. He closes his tired eyes, listening to the gentle morning wind rustling through the empty canvas tarps. The rhythm of the war has moved on, leaving him behind in the quiet exhaustion of the rear echelon. He folds his grease-stained hands softly in his lap, surrendering finally to the heavy, peaceful weight of sleep, an unsung hero resting quietly in the dust of a broken world. There is a heartbreaking beauty in a place that does not yet know it is about to become a memory. The valley unfolds gently, a wide, shallow bowl of earth cradling a small, ordinary railway station. This is Prokhorovka. In another time, a time that feels like it belongs to a different century, this was simply a place of quiet arrivals and tearful goodbyes. It was a place where local farmers waited for the morning train, where the smell of coal smoke mingled with the sweet scent of the blooming apple orchards, and where the rhythmic clacking of wheels on steel tracks was the only thunder anyone ever knew. But tonight, the trains are not running. The ticket windows are dark, the wooden platforms are empty, and a profound, eerie calm has settled over the valley. The two greatest armies the world has ever seen have converged on this tiny point on the map, creeping down the gentle slopes in the dark, and now they have simply stopped. They sit on opposite edges of the valley, hidden in the shadows of the tall grass and the scattered groves of birch trees. The storm has gathered its breath, the dark clouds are heavy with fire, but for this one, lingering, suspended night, the rain does not fall. The silence in the valley is thick and absolute. It is not the peaceful silence of a sleeping world, it is the breathless, pressurized hush of a cathedral just before the choir begins to sing. It is the eye of the hurricane, a surreal pocket of tranquility in the center of a burning continent. Down near the raised embankment of the railway tracks, a group of young Soviet tank crewmen are resting. They have driven for days, their bodies bruised by the violent shaking of their machines, their faces coated in a thick, gray mask of dust and engine exhaust. But here, in the cool, blue shadow of the station's water tower, they have finally turned their engines off. Let us sit beside a young driver named Misha. He is sitting directly on one of the thick, wooden railway ties, his knees pulled up to his chest. The wood beneath him is warm from the day's sun, and it smells richly of dark pine resin, old creosote, and the damp earth. Misha reaches down and traces his finger along the cold, smooth steel of the railway track. It runs off into the dark, disappearing into the distant horizon. This track goes to Moscow, he thinks to himself. It goes past the deep forests of his childhood, past the wide rivers where he used to fish with his grandfather, straight to the heart of the home he is trying so desperately to protect. The cold steel is a physical tether, a line connecting this terrifying, lonely valley to everything he has ever loved. Beside him, the tall, broad-shouldered commander of his tank, a man named Victor, sits down with a soft groan. Victor has kind eyes, deeply lined with exhaustion, and a thick mustache that hides a gentle smile. He reaches into the breast pocket of his dark tunic and pulls out a small, crumpled pouch of tobacco and a few thin slips of paper. With slow, practiced movements, Victor rolls a cigarette. He places it between his lips and pulls a single wooden match from his pocket. He strikes it against the sole of his boot. The tiny, brilliant flare of the match is blinding in the deep dark. Victor cups his large, calloused hands around the flame, shielding it entirely so the enemy across the valley cannot see the light. He leans in, the brief, orange glow illuminating the deep exhaustion in his eyes, and takes a slow draw. He passes the cigarette to Misha. The young boy takes it with a trembling hand. They do not speak. There are no words left that can adequately describe the weight of the coming dawn. They simply pass the cigarette back and forth in the dark, watching the thin, gray ribbon of smoke drift up toward the canopy of stars. It is a profoundly intimate ritual, a silent communion between two men who know that tomorrow they will only have each other. In the quiet, Misha looks down at his boots. Pushing its way up through the dark gravel and the heavy wooden sleepers is a single, tiny wildflower. Its petals are a pale, fragile blue. Misha gently cups his hand around the flower, protecting it from the cool night wind. He wonders how something so delicate can survive in a place so entirely consumed by iron. He leaves it untouched, a tiny, stubborn monument to life in the Valley of the Shadow. Across the gentle expanse of the valley, on the opposite slope, the German forces rest in the very same, agonizing quiet. Their massive, heavy machines sit like slumbering beasts in the tall grass, their metal hulls ticking softly as they cool in the night air. A young gunner named Heinrich sits on the sloping front armor of his tank. The metal is comfortably warm beneath him, like a stone hearth in winter. Heinrich is looking down into the valley, tracing the faint, ghostly silhouette of the Prokhorovka station against the starlit sky. He can just barely make out the shape of the water tower and the straight, unnatural line of the railway embankment. Heinrich is holding a small, leather-bound prayer book. He is not reading it. It is far too dark to see the tiny, printed words. But he knows them all by heart anyway. He runs his thumb over the worn, gold leaf cross stamped into the cover. It was given to him by his mother on the morning he boarded the train to leave home. She had pressed it into his hand, her eyes shining with unshed tears, and told him to let it be his shield. He holds the book to his chest and closes his eyes. He does not pray for victory. He does not pray for the destruction of the men sleeping just a mile away. He prays for courage. He whispers a soft, breathless plea into the cool night air, asking for the strength to keep his hand steady, to do his duty, and to protect the three young men sleeping inside the iron box beneath him. The intimacy of a tank crew is a strange and beautiful thing. They are 4 or 5 men from different towns, different families, different lives, forced together into a suffocating, tiny room of steel. They breathe the same stale air, they smell each other's fear, and they trust their lives entirely to the voices of their brothers in the dark. Heinrich looks down into the open hatch beside him. His driver, a cheerful boy from Bavaria who usually hums folk songs while he works, is asleep in his seat. But the boy is shivering. It is not the cold of the night, it is the deep, uncontrollable tremor of nervous exhaustion. Heinrich quietly unrolls his own heavy woolen blanket. He reaches down through the hatch and gently drapes it over the sleeping boy's shoulders, tucking it in around his neck. "Rest," Heinrich whispers into the dark cabin. "I will keep watch." The boy's shivering slowly subsides, warmed by the heavy wool and the comforting presence of his friend. Heinrich climbs back onto the hull and returns his gaze to the silent station below. As the deepest hours of the night roll on, the valley begins to breathe. The warm air of the day, trapped in the shallow bowl of the earth, meets the cooling air of the night, and a soft, pale mist begins to form. It rises from the ground like a gentle sigh, wrapping around the stalks of the sunflowers and pooling in the low hollows of the terrain. Slowly, the mist creeps down the slopes and covers the small railway station. The wooden platforms, the rusted tracks, and the forgotten ticket office are swallowed by the white fog, turning Prokhorovka into a beautiful, ghostly apparition. The fog is a profound mercy. It acts as a veil, hiding the armies from one another, softening the harsh, terrifying lines of the iron machines. For a few precious hours, the war simply ceases to exist. There is only the damp, cool fog, the smell of the wet grass, and the soft, rhythmic breathing of 100,000 sleeping men. Listen to the sounds of the valley in this final hour. The crickets in the tall grass continue their steady, melodic chirping, completely indifferent to the great clash of empires resting on their doorstep. An owl hoots softly from the branches of a distant birch tree, its voice carrying clearly through the damp, heavy air. The natural world carries on, following its ancient, peaceful rhythms, providing a gentle lullaby for the terrified boys who have come to tear the earth apart. In the trenches and beneath the tracks, the men who cannot sleep are writing letters in their minds. They fold their hands and imagine they are holding the faces of their wives, their mothers, their children. They walk through the rooms of their homes in their memories, touching the familiar furniture, listening to the floorboards creak, smelling the familiar scents of wood smoke and baking bread. They lock themselves away in these quiet, mental sanctuaries, gathering the last of their strength, hoarding their humanity before the morning demands they become something else entirely. The sky above the mist slowly begins to change. The impenetrable blackness softens, taking on the deep, bruised color of indigo. The stars, which have watched over the valley all night with cold, glittering indifference, begin to slowly fade away, retreating one by one. The birds, hidden in the groves and the tall reeds, begin to wake. They do not know what this day will bring. They only know that the light is returning. They begin their morning chorus, a high, clear, and breathtakingly beautiful symphony of trills and whistles that echoes through the foggy valley. It is a sound of pure, innocent joy, contrasting so sharply with the heavy dread resting in the hearts of the men below that it brings tears to the eyes of those who listen. Misha, still sitting on the wooden railway tie, finishes the last drag of the shared cigarette. He drops the tiny, glowing ember onto the gravel and carefully crushes it beneath his heel. He looks at Victor. The older man's face is slowly becoming visible in the pale, gray light. Victor nods, a slow, solemn acknowledgement that the waiting is finally over. Across the valley, Heinrich watches the mist begin to slowly thin, revealing the faint, shadowy outlines of the station once more. He traces the worn gold cross on his prayer book one last time, kisses the leather gently, and slides it deep into his pocket, resting it against his beating heart. He takes a long, slow breath of the damp, foggy air, filling his lungs with the peacefulness of the morning. The eerie calm is ending. The fragile, beautiful suspension of time is gently breaking apart. The valley of Prokhorovka is waking up. But for this one, final, lingering moment, as the birds sing and the mist slowly curls around the rusted railway tracks, there is only peace. There is only the shared breath of tired men, the quiet resilience of a single blue wildflower, and the haunting, tragic beauty of a small, ordinary place waiting in the quiet dawn. To be trapped inside a mountain of moving iron is to surrender your eyes to the dark, and your life entirely to the voice of a friend. When the pale morning mist finally burns away from the valley, the gentle illusion of peace evaporates with it. The soft, quiet hours of the night are packed away into memory, and the world is surrendered to the heavy, mechanical breathing of thousands of waking engines. Across the rolling steppe, the grand, terrible armies begin to move toward one another. From a great height, it might look like two vast, dark tides of the ocean being pulled together by an unseen moon. But to the men on the ground, there is no grand perspective. There is no sweeping, majestic view of history. There is only the incredibly small, terrifyingly intimate space inside a box of sweltering steel. Listen to the heavy, definitive sound of a metal hatch being pulled shut. It is a thick, resonant clank that seals the young men inside, cutting them off entirely from the wide blue sky, the scent of the wildgrass, and the fresh summer breeze. The moment that heavy lid drops into place, the universe shrinks down to a space no larger than a tiny, shadowed closet. Inside this armored cocoon, for young men sit in the dim, artificial twilight. The interior walls were once painted a clean, bright white to reflect the meager light, but now they are stained with dark smears of engine grease, the gray dust of the planes, and the nervous sweat of the boys who live within them. The air immediately grows thick and heavy. It smells sharply of hot oil, electrical ozone, crushed leather, and the sour, metallic tang of fear. Let us sit in the dark beside a young German driver named Johannes. He is tucked deep into the front belly of the machine, a space so cramped he cannot fully extend his legs. He rests his heavy boots on the metal foot pedals, his hands gripping the twin steering levers so tightly that his knuckles are stark white beneath the grime. Johannes has lost the world. He has no windows. He has no horizon. His entire view of the vast, unfolding summer day is restricted to a single, narrow prism of thick glass directly in front of his eyes. Through this tiny slit, he can see nothing but a few yards of crushed, dusty grass, and the churning metal treads of the machine directly ahead of him. The massive steel walls surrounding him vibrate violently with the roar of the engine, shaking his teeth and rattling deep within his bones. He is essentially blind, buried alive in a moving iron tomb. But Johannes is not alone. Pressed tightly against his throat is a small, black microphone. And strapped over his ears are heavy, padded leather headphones. Through the crackle of static and the overwhelming hum of the engine, a voice reaches down to him from the turret above. It is the voice of his commander, an older, quiet man named Elias. Elias is the only one who can see. He stands with his head resting against the rim of the commander's cupola, peering out into the dust and the chaos. He is the eyes of the beast, and Johannes is the muscle. The bond between them is an act of profound, desperate trust. Steady, Johannes, Elias's voice crackles through the wire. The tone is completely calm, a gentle, anchoring baritone that cuts through the terrifying noise. A little to the left now. Just a little. That is good. Keep this pace. Johannes closes his eyes for a brief moment and breathes out a shaky sigh. He lets the voice wash over him. In the terrifying dark, Elias's voice is the only thing that makes sense. It is a tether of pure humanity tying Johannes to the earth. He does not steer the heavy machine, he simply follows the quiet cadence of his friend. When the fear threatens to rise up in his chest, threatening to suffocate him in the cramped, airless space, Elias's steady, reassuring words push the panic back down. As the two great tides of iron finally collide, the battle does not look like a grand maneuver. It is a blind, suffocating brawl in a sea of pulverized earth. The dry ground is churned into an impossibly thick, towering cloud of gray and amber dust that completely blots out the sun. The daylight turns into a strange, glowing dusk. Inside the machines, the collision is felt as a series of heavy, jarring physical shocks. The steel hull shudders violently as the earth erupts outside. The sound of the battle is entirely muffled by the thick armor. It is not a sharp, crisp series of explosions, but a continuous, deafening, low-frequency roar, like being trapped beneath a heavy waterfall of sound. Across the swirling, dust-choked valley, in the sweltering turret of a Soviet machine, a young loader named Alexei is fighting a desperate battle against his own exhausted body. The heat inside his iron box is unimaginable. The July sun is beating down on the metal roof, baking the interior like a stone oven. The heavy gun beside him breathes fire, filling the cramped space with the acrid, burning smell of cordite and sulfur. Alexei is stripped to the waist, his skin glistening with a heavy coat of sweat and black gunpowder residue. His muscles scream in agony as he wrestles the heavy, brass artillery shells from their racks, feeding them into the smoking breech of the gun. He is so thirsty that his tongue feels like a piece of dry felt. The air is so thick with smoke and heat that every breath feels like swallowing hot sand. He leans back against the curving steel wall, gasping, his vision swimming with dark, exhausted spots. He feels as though he is sinking to the bottom of a boiling, suffocating ocean. Suddenly, he feels a hand on his bare shoulder. It is his commander, a quiet, gentle man from the northern forests. The commander does not yell. He does not berate Alexei for pausing. He simply reaches down, unclips a battered canvas canteen from his belt, and presses it into Alexei's trembling, blackened hands. There is barely a mouthful of water left inside. It is warm and tastes strongly of tin and rust. But to Alexei, it is the sweetest, most precious thing in the world. He takes a tiny sip, letting the moisture coat his parched throat. He hands it back, but the commander gently pushes Alexei's hands away, nodding silently for him to finish it. It is a tiny, beautiful act of grace in the very center of hell. In this dark, sweltering oven, surrounded by a deafening symphony of destruction, this small offering of lukewarm water is a profound declaration of brotherhood. Alexei drinks the last drop. He looks at his commander, gives a slow, heavy nod, and turns back to his exhausting work. The fear and the heat have not vanished, but the crushing weight of isolation has been lifted. He is seen. He is cared for. And that is enough to keep him moving. Hour after brutal hour, the blind struggle continues. The men inside the machines lose all concept of time. The sun might be high overhead, or it might be dipping toward the horizon. They have no way of knowing. Their universe is measured only in the rhythmic, rocking sway of the tracks, the suffocating heat, and the constant, static-filled voices in their ears. Down in the belly of his machine, Johannes is weeping. He is not weeping out of fear, but out of sheer, overwhelming sensory exhaustion. The continuous, heavy vibrations have left his hands completely numb. His clothes are soaked through with sweat. The thick, dusty air is making his eyes burn and water continuously. "I cannot see, Elias," Johannes whispers into his throat microphone, his voice cracking. "The dust, it is too thick. I cannot see anything at all through the glass." There is a brief moment of static, and then Elias's calm, soothing voice returns. "You do not need to see, my friend," Elias says softly. "I am looking for you. I have my eyes on the sky. Just listen to me. Close your eyes if they burn. Let your hands do the walking. Keep us straight. You are doing so well, Johannes. You are keeping us safe." Johannes closes his burning eyes. He lets go of his desperate need to understand the world outside the iron walls. He simply listens. He lets Elias's voice flow into his mind, navigating the terrible, shaking dark through trust alone. He pictures Elias sitting above him, a calm, steady lighthouse in the middle of a raging, dusty sea. He focuses entirely on the gentle pressure of his boots on the pedals and the smooth, leather-wrapped steel of the steering levers. He becomes one with the machine, guided entirely by the quiet love and reassurance of his brother in the dark. This is the true story of the Great Collision. It is not found in the sweeping movements of flags on a map. It is found in the suffocating dark. It is found in the men who hold hands in the shadows to stop them from shaking. It is found in the quiet, desperate prayers whispered into throat microphones, and the shared drops of warm water passed between blackened fingers. As the long, terrible afternoon finally begins to bleed into evening, the fierce, roaring tide of the battle slowly begins to recede. The engines, one by one, begin to throttle down. The deafening, muffled thunder softens into a low, distant rumble, and then, eventually, fades into a heavy, ringing silence. The machines crawl to a halt in the deep, torn earth. They sit there, steaming and ticking in the cooling air, like exhausted beasts of burden that have finally reached the end of a merciless road. Inside the dark, stifling cabins, the men do not cheer. They do not celebrate. They simply collapse. They let their heavy heads fall forward against the metal bulkheads. They pull off their leather headphones, letting the static fade into nothingness. They sit in the profound, crushing quiet, listening only to the ragged, exhausted sound of their own breathing. Then comes the most beautiful sound in the world. It is the heavy, scraping clank of the steel hatches being pushed open from the inside. Johannes looks up from his driver's seat. Above him, the heavy iron lid is pushed back, and a square of pure, miraculous light pours into the dark, smoky cabin. It is the deep, bruised violet light of the evening sky. Elias reaches down through the open hatch, offering his hand. Johannes takes it. His grip is weak, his muscles trembling with the aftershocks of the day, but Elias holds him firmly, pulling him up out of the stifling belly of the machine. Johannes emerges from the hatch like a man rising from the depths of the sea. The cool, clean air of the evening hits his face, and it feels like a physical blessing. It smells of damp earth and cooling grass, cutting through the horrible stench of oil and cordite that has filled his lungs for hours. He rests his arms on the cool metal rim of the cupola and looks out. The valley is entirely still. The dust is slowly settling, turning the air into a soft, hazy gold. The sky above is vast and unbothered, and the very first, pale stars are beginning to prick through the twilight. Johannes turns and looks at Elias. The older man's face is completely black with soot, leaving only his kind, tired eyes shining through the grime. Elias does not say a word. He simply reaches out and places a heavy, warm hand on the back of Johannes's neck, a gentle, silent confirmation that they have survived. All across the silent, scarred valley, the heavy metal hatches are opening. Young men covered in grease and dust climb out of their sweltering iron boxes. They sit on the cold, sloping armor of their machines, pulling their knees to their chests. They do not look at the broken landscape around them. They tilt their heads back and look straight up at the sky. They breathe in the cool air, taking long, deep, trembling draughts of the evening breeze. They sit together in the quiet dark, a brotherhood of survivors bound by the secret, suffocating intimacy of the iron. The storm has passed, leaving them battered and exhausted, but as they sit beneath the protective canopy of the stars, resting on the backs of their sleeping machines, they are grateful simply for the beautiful, fragile gift of being able to take a breath of fresh air. There is a specific, invisible gravity to a whispered rumor, a weight that can pull the hope from a man's chest faster than any falling shell. The Russian steppe is caught in a hazy, exhausted lull. The great, roaring collisions of the past few days have slowly ground to a halt, leaving the vast plains veiled in a lingering, powdery gray dust. The sky is a pale, washed-out blue, shimmering with the relentless afternoon heat. In the trenches and beneath the shadows of their battered machines, the men of the German army are resting. They are draped over the earth like discarded coats, their faces darkened by soot and exhaustion, their breathing shallow and slow. They are existing in a fragile bubble of quiet, believing, if only for a moment, that the worst of the summer storm has finally passed. They believe that their immense sacrifices, the friends they have left behind in the tall grass, have bought them a measure of victory. But far behind the lines, in a stifling, canvas-draped command tent, the outside world is about to violently intrude. Let us step into the dim, amber-lit shadows of this tent. The air inside is unbearably thick, smelling of hot canvas, stale cigarette smoke, and the sharp, metallic tang of ozone. Sitting at a folding wooden table is a young radio operator named Werner. He wears heavy, padded leather headphones pressed tightly against his ears. Before him sits a complex wall of glowing vacuum tubes, dials, and tangled wires. Werner is listening to the static. To him, the white noise of the radio waves sounds like the distant, rhythmic crashing of the ocean. He closes his eyes and lets the static wash over him, a soothing, meaningless sound in a world that has been far too loud. But suddenly, the rhythm of the static breaks. A voice cuts through the crackling ether, faint at first, then growing sharper, more urgent. It is a broadcast from the homeland, relayed across thousands of miles of wire and invisible waves. Werner reaches up with a trembling hand and presses the headphones closer to his ears, his brow furrowing as he struggles to catch the words through the interference. He hears a name. It is a name that does not belong in this dry, dusty world. Sicily. The voice on the radio speaks of an enormous enemy fleet. It speaks of paratroopers falling from the night sky, of landing craft hitting the warm, sandy beaches of the Mediterranean. It speaks of a new front, a massive invasion far to the south, at the very doorstep of Europe. Werner's hands fall slowly to his lap. He stares blankly at the glowing amber dials of his machine. The world inside the tent has not changed. The dust is still settling on the canvas roof. The heat is still stifling. But the invisible architecture of Werner's reality has just collapsed. He slowly pulls the heavy headphones from his ears and sets them gently on the wooden table. He feels a sudden, profound coldness creeping up from the pit of his stomach, entirely at odds with the sweltering heat of the afternoon. He steps out of the tent, blinking against the harsh, brilliant sunlight. He does not shout. He does not sound an alarm. News like this is too heavy to be carried by a shout. It must be handed over gently, carefully, like a fragile piece of glass. Werner walks over to a tired medic sitting on a stack of empty crates. He leans down and whispers the words. The medic's eyes widen, and then, slowly, he looks down at the dirt. The medic tells a passing courier. The courier tells a group of infantrymen sharing a tin of cold water. Like a dark, invisible ripple spreading across the surface of a still pond, the news moves through the army. It travels down the winding, earthen trenches. It passes from dugout to dugout, carried on the soft, exhausted voices of men who can barely believe what they are saying. Let us follow the whisper to a young soldier named Julian, who is sitting in the meager shade of a disabled transport vehicle. Julian has taken off his heavy boots, massaging his blistered, aching feet. When the man sitting next to him leans over and speaks the name of the distant island, Julian's hands simply stop moving. Julian closes his eyes. He tries to picture Sicily. He has never been there, but he has seen photographs in magazines before the world caught fire. He imagines the deep, brilliant blue of the Mediterranean Sea. He imagines terraced hillsides covered in silver-leaved olive trees and the bright, sweet scent of lemon groves warming in the sun. It sounds like a paradise. It sounds like a place entirely untouched by the gray, choking misery of the Russian plains. But the image of that distant shore brings him no comfort. Instead, it brings a quiet, crushing realization. For weeks, Julian and the men around him have been told that this summer offensive was the fulcrum upon which the entire war rested. They were told that if they could just push through the dust, if they could just endure the terrifying artillery and the endless labyrinths of the sunflower fields, they would secure a final, lasting victory. They poured their hearts, their courage, and their blood into this single, isolated patch of earth. They believed they were holding the center of the world. Now, as the whisper travels through the dry grass, that belief slowly deflates. If the enemy is landing on the warm beaches of the south, if the war is expanding across the oceans and touching the edges of their homeland, then what does this patch of dusty earth truly matter? Julian looks out over the scarred, burning steppe. He thinks of the friends he has buried in shallow graves over the past week. He thinks of the terrifying, breathless nights spent waiting in the dark, and the unimaginable horrors he has forced himself to endure. A deep, heavy sorrow settles squarely on his chest. It is the terrible, isolating feeling of futility. The sacrifices they have made here suddenly feel terribly small. They are no longer the tip of a victorious spear. They are merely a single, forgotten gear in a massive, failing machine that is slowly tearing itself apart across the globe. The war has grown too vast, too monstrous, entirely beyond their control. Down the line, an older sergeant named Thomas watches the news wash over his men. He sees the physical change in them. The army does not break into a panic. There is no weeping, no shouting. There is only a profound, collective slumping of shoulders. The fierce, nervous tension that had kept them upright for weeks dissolves, replaced by a deep, melancholic resignation. The fire in their eyes, fueled by the desperate hope of a swift end, gently flickers and dies. Thomas knows there are no words of comfort he can offer. He cannot promise them a grand victory anymore. He cannot tell them that their suffering will alter the course of history. So, he does the only thing a good man can do in the face of such overwhelming despair. He offers presence. He sits down in the dirt beside a young boy who is staring blankly at his own hands. Thomas reaches into his canvas pack and pulls out a small, carefully hoarded piece of hardened sugar. He breaks it in half with his calloused thumbs. He places one piece in his own mouth and presses the other gently into the palm of the young boy. They sit together in silence, letting the sweet taste slowly dissolve on their tongues. It is a quiet acknowledgement of the sorrow they share. It is a promise that even if the world is falling apart thousands of miles away, and even if their grand dreams have turned to ash, they will not abandon each other in the dust. They will face the fading of the light together. As evening approaches, the sky over the steppe turns a deep, bruised violet. The wind picks up, blowing a fine, powdery layer of earth over the sleeping machines and the quiet men. The vastness of the plains no longer feels majestic, it feels like an endless, open prison. In the dim light of the dugouts, men begin to write letters home. But the tone of their words has subtly, irrevocably shifted. They no longer write of sweeping advances or the glory of the coming autumn. They write with the careful, measured restraint of men who know they are writing to a world that is slipping away from them. My dearest, Julian writes, his pencil moving slowly over a piece of stained paper. The wind is cold tonight. We heard news from the south today. It feels as though the world is very large, and we are very small, lost in an ocean of tall grass. Please do not worry for me. I am sitting with good men. We share our water, and we watch the stars together. I only wish I could smell the sea. Think of me when the morning comes. He folds the letter carefully, sealing away his heartbreak, offering only gentle reassurance to the people he loves. They had marched into the summer waiting to hear the glorious sirens of victory, the ringing bells that would call them back to their homes, heroes of a finished war. But as the darkness fully settles over the valley, there are no sirens. There are no bells. There is only the long, mournful sigh of the wind rushing through the tangled barbed wire and the dry stalks of the sunflowers. It is the silence of a dying dream. It is the quiet, heavy realization that the road ahead is no longer a path to triumph, but a long, bitter journey of simple survival. The men wrap their woolen blankets tightly around their shoulders. They pull their knees to their chests, seeking whatever warmth they can find in the cool earth. They close their eyes, not to dream of victory, but simply to escape the waking world for a few precious hours. They surrender themselves to the quiet night, sleeping beneath an indifferent canopy of stars, holding onto the fragile comfort of the men breathing softly beside them in the dark. There is a quiet, shattering heartbreak in the moment a man must turn his back on the very earth he just gave everything to hold. The morning does not arrive with the brilliant, searing light of the summer sun. Instead, it creeps across the vast, rolling expanse of the Russian steppe wearing a thick, heavy cloak of pure white mist. The world is entirely swallowed by a soft, damp gray. The air is so thick with moisture that it beads like tiny, fragile pearls on the eyelashes of the resting men, turning the coarse wool of their greatcoats a dark, bruised charcoal. It is a morning of absolute, muffled silence. The wind has completely died down, and the terrible, roaring thunder of the past weeks feels as though it belonged to another lifetime. In this hushed, ethereal twilight, a profound and heavy secret is making its way through the German lines. Deep within a timberline dugout, illuminated only by the weak, flickering golden light of a single candle, an older commander named Wilhelm sits at a small, folding wooden table. His face is a map of deep shadows and weary lines. He holds a small, remarkably ordinary slip of paper in his hands. It was brought to him just moments ago by a breathless courier who emerged from the fog like a ghost. Wilhelm does not read the words aloud. He does not need to. He stares at the paper until the letters blur, feeling a sudden, immense weight settle squarely upon his shoulders. The order is simple. The great offensive, the massive, earth-shaking push that was meant to change the course of the world, has been quietly called off. They are to pack their gear, turn their faces away from the east, and begin to walk backward into the fog. Slowly, Wilhelm takes off his wire-rimmed glasses and pinches the bridge of his nose. He looks down at the large, detailed map spread across his table. For weeks, he and his men had drawn bold, sweeping arrows across that paper, pointing toward the rising sun, pushing their hopes and their lives into the endless horizon. With a trembling, soot-stained hand, Wilhelm reaches out and gently rolls the map up, tucking it away into a leather cylinder. It is a quiet, devastating surrender. He blows out the candle, plunging the tiny room into darkness, and sits for a moment in the black, gathering the strength to go outside and break the hearts of his men. The news ripples through the trenches not with a shout, but with a soft, mournful whisper. It is passed from cold lips to cold ears, traveling down the winding dirt corridors like a gentle, tragic breeze. We are stepping back. We are leaving. Let us stand beside a young infantryman named Lucas as he hears the words. He is sitting on the firing step of his trench, a rusted tin cup of cold chicory coffee resting in his dirt-caked hands. When the man beside him leans over and whispers the order, Lucas simply stops breathing for a moment. He looks out over the parapet, staring into the impenetrable white wall of the fog. Out there, hidden in the mist, is the ground they fought so desperately to claim. It is the ground where they left their youth, their innocence, and so many of their friends. To advance was terrifying, but it carried the fierce, bright spark of purpose. To retreat is a completely different kind of agony. It is a slow, cold deflation of the soul. It is the quiet realization that all the suffering, all the terror, and all the blood poured into this dry soil has ultimately been in vain. Lucas slowly stands up. He empties the dregs of his coffee into the dirt. Around him, the trench is coming alive with a slow, somber movement. Men are rolling up their damp blankets, strapping their canvas packs to their backs, and picking up their heavy rifles. There is no panic. There is no hurried, frantic scramble to escape. There is only a profound, collective grief, expressed in the slow, deliberate slumping of thousands of shoulders. The physical act of turning around is the hardest part. For months, their entire world has been oriented toward the east. Their eyes have always searched the eastern horizon, their boots have always marched toward the morning light. Now, they must pivot. They must turn their backs on the enemy, face the west, and step into the unknown shadows of a long, bitter journey home. Before he climbs out of the trench, Lucas pauses. He walks a few yards down the earthen corridor to a place where the dirt wall has been gently smoothed flat. At the base of the wall sits a small, hastily constructed cross made from two broken branches bound together with a strip of canvas. Beneath it rests a boy Lucas had known since childhood, a boy who had shared his rations and his fears just 3 days ago. Lucas drops to one knee. The damp earth soaks instantly through his trousers. He takes off his steel helmet and rests his forehead against the cool, wet wood of the cross. "I am sorry," Lucas whispers into the quiet fog, his voice breaking. "I am so incredibly sorry that we have to leave you here in the dark. Sleep well, my friend. The war is over for you. The earth will keep you warm." He reaches into his deep coat pocket and pulls out a smooth, round chestnut. He had picked it up from the ground beneath a grand old tree in his village before he left for the front, carrying it as a tiny piece of home. He presses the dark, polished nut firmly into the dirt at the base of the cross, leaving a piece of his own heart behind. He stands up, wipes a single tear from his soot-stained cheek, and climbs out of the trench to join the quiet, retreating procession. The fog is a strange, melancholy blessing. It acts as a massive, white curtain, shielding the withdrawing army from the eyes of the enemy. It hides their shame, and it hides their sorrow. But it also isolates them. As the men begin to walk across the damp steppe, the world shrinks down to a space no larger than a few feet in any direction. The man walking just 10 paces ahead is entirely swallowed by the mist, becoming nothing more than a faint, ghostly silhouette. The sounds of the retreat are incredibly muted. The rhythmic crunch of thousands of boots on the wet gravel, the soft clinking of tin canteens against metal buckles, the low, steady breathing of exhausted men, it all blends into a gentle, continuous shushing sound, like the slow, rhythmic breathing of a sleeping giant. Even the great, iron machines seem to understand the solemnity of the morning. The massive tanks, scarred and battered by the long summer, start their engines with a low, mournful rumble. They do not roar. They engage their gears and slowly, carefully begin to roll backward. The heavy steel treads crush the damp grass, leaving deep, dark scars in the earth that point toward the west. The young drivers peer through their narrow glass prisms, watching the land they fought so hard to conquer slowly slip away from them, dissolving instantly into the white void. Walking in the heavy mist is an eerie, dreamlike experience. It feels as though they have already left the earth and are wandering through a purgatory of clouds. The damp chill seeps through their heavy coats, settling deep into their tired bones. In this quiet, floating world, small moments of extraordinary tenderness bloom between the men. A young boy, his feet rubbed raw and bleeding inside his boots, stumbles over an unseen root and falls to his knees in the wet grass. He does not have the strength to stand back up. He simply bows his head, letting the fog wash over him, ready to surrender to the overwhelming exhaustion. But out of the white mist steps an older sergeant. The man does not yell. He does not order the boy to his feet. He simply walks over, unslings his own heavy rifle, and then reaches down to wrap his strong, calloused arm around the young boy's waist. With a gentle, steady heave, he pulls the boy upright. "Lean on me," the sergeant whispers softly, adjusting his own stance to bear the boy's weight. "I have you. Just focus on the fog. One step, and then the next. We will find our way together." They walk side by side, a slow, limping shadow moving through the mist. It is the pure, unfiltered essence of everyday heroism. It is the choice to carry a brother's burden when your own back is already breaking. In the face of a failing empire, these men hold onto the only thing that truly matters, the fragile, beating heart of the man walking beside them. As the morning stretches into the afternoon, the thick fog stubbornly refuses to lift. It clings to the steppe, wrapping the retreating army in a protective, suffocating embrace. The profound realization of their defeat settles into them, not as a sudden, sharp panic, but as a slow, cold ache. The tide has turned. The grand, terrifying wave that had swept across the continent has finally crested, broken, and is now pulling back toward the sea. A soldier named Julian walks with his eyes closed, letting the hand of the man in front of him guide him by the shoulder. In the quiet darkness of his own mind, Julian is composing a letter to his wife. "My beautiful Anna," he thinks, his internal voice soft and rhythmic, matching the slow crunch of his boots. "We have turned our faces to the sun, though we cannot see it through the mist. The great summer has ended. We are stepping backward now, leaving so much behind us in the tall grass. I am so tired, Anna. We are all so profoundly tired. But for the first time in many months, I feel a strange, quiet relief. The illusion has broken. We are no longer invincible conquerors trying to hold the world in our hands. We are just young men, desperately trying to find the long, dark road that leads back to your open door." He breathes out a long, slow sigh, watching his breath form a tiny, pale cloud that instantly joins the vastness of the fog. The retreat continues, a slow, unending river of gray uniforms pouring quietly toward the west. They leave behind empty, silent trenches. They leave behind broken, rusting machines that look like the skeletons of ancient beasts. And they leave behind the thousands of quiet, wooden crosses, slowly being swallowed by the damp, protective mist. Let us leave them to their walk. Let us watch as the white curtain of the fog gently closes behind the last, limping soldier, hiding him completely from view. The Russian steppe returns to a state of absolute, breathless peace. The wind begins to blow softly across the wild grass, carrying away the scent of the men, and leaving only the clean, earthy smell of the morning. The battle is over. The silence has won. And as the exhausted men walk deeper into the mist, carrying their grief and their quiet resilience in their pockets, they surrender to the rhythm of the retreat, lulled by the soft, steady sound of their own footsteps, dreaming of the day the fog will finally clear, and they will see the light of home. There is a deeply unsettling feeling when the ancient woods stop merely existing and begin to quietly watch you. The vast, open ocean of the Russian steppe has finally been left behind. The retreating army, a long, weary ribbon of bruised and battered men, now slowly winds its way into the deep, ancient forests of the West. After weeks exposed to the blinding, merciless sun of the open plains, the sudden canopy of thick green leaves and towering pines feels like stepping into a vast, shadowy cathedral. The air here is immediately different. It is wonderfully cool, heavy with the damp, rich scent of green moss, ancient bark, and decaying pine needles. The blazing summer heat is filtered down into a soft, dappled twilight that rests gently on the shoulders of the exhausted men. At first, the forest feels like a sanctuary. It offers shade. It offers a place to hide from the terrible, searching eyes of the airplanes that have hunted them for days. But as the long lines of men trudge deeper into the timber, the comforting embrace of the trees slowly begins to change. The profound, sprawling silence of the woods ceases to be peaceful and begins to feel incredibly heavy. They are not alone in the dark. The men feel it before they see it. It is a subtle prickling at the back of the neck, a strange, shivering instinct inherited from ancient ancestors who knew that the shadows hid hunters. The forest is alive, and it is breathing, and it is watching them pass. These are the partisans. They are the unseen phantoms of the woods, men and women of the villages who have melted into the deep timber to protect their homeland. They wear no uniforms. They carry no grand banners. They are farmers, schoolteachers, and woodcutters who know every hidden ravine, every mossy game trail, and every whispering birch tree in this vast wilderness. And they are following the retreating army, shadowing them step for exhausted step, like a quiet, invisible tide. Let us walk beside a young German infantryman named Klaus. He is walking along the raised gravel bed of the railway line, his worn boots crunching softly with every agonizing step. The soles of his boots are wearing thin, and he can feel the sharp edges of the crushed stones pressing into his bruised heels. He keeps his eyes fixed on the heavy iron rails stretching out before him, disappearing into the dark corridor of the trees. These iron rails are the only thing keeping Klaus moving. They are the lifeline. They represent the trains, the massive, steam-breathing engines that he hopes are waiting just a few miles ahead, ready to carry him away from this terrifying summer and bring him back to the soft bed of his childhood. He reaches out and rests his dirt-stained hand on the cold steel of the rail, treating it like a banister in a dark stairwell, letting it guide him through the shadows. But as Klaus walks, he cannot stop looking over his shoulder. The trees press in tightly on both sides of the tracks. He sees the ferns rustle in the gentle wind, but his exhausted mind plays cruel tricks on him. Every swaying branch looks like a rifle barrel. Every shadow cast by a twisted trunk looks like a man crouching in the dark. The haunting paranoia settles into his bones, a slow, dripping dread that is far more exhausting than the physical act of walking. He wants to call out. He wants to ask the shadows to simply show themselves. The anticipation of an unseen danger is a heavy, suffocating blanket that makes it difficult to draw a full breath. He walks closer to the man in front of him, desperate for the warmth and the solid, undeniable reality of another human being. He watches the rhythmic sway of his comrade's canvas pack, focusing entirely on that simple, hypnotic movement, trying to banish the ghosts from the corners of his eyes. Deep in the woods, resting silently behind the thick, silver trunk of an old birch tree, an older Soviet man named Grigory is watching the column pass. Grigory was once a quiet man who spent his days carving small wooden animals for his grandchildren. Now, he holds a rusted rifle across his knees. He is so perfectly still that a small, gray bird has landed on a branch just inches from his head, completely unaware of his presence. Grigory watches Klaus stumble on the gravel. He sees the dark, hollow circles under the young boy's eyes. He sees the way the boy's shoulders slump beneath the weight of his coat. A profound, complicated sorrow moves through Grigory's chest. He looks down at his own withered hands. He does not see these retreating boys as monsters anymore. He only sees broken, exhausted children, wandering lost through a forest that does not want them. But Grigory knows the earth beneath his feet is his home, and he knows what he must do to protect it. He does not raise his rifle. He does not want to take a life today if he can avoid it. His war is much quieter, and much more devastating. When the sun finally sets, plunging the ancient forest into an absolute, inky blackness, the retreating army comes to a halt. They are too tired to build proper camps, and they are too terrified of the unseen eyes to light fires. The darkness is absolute. The men sit exactly where they stopped, resting their backs against the rough bark of the trees or lying down in the damp ferns. They huddle together for warmth, sharing the meager heat of their bodies in the cooling night air. Klaus sits with his back against a massive pine, his knees pulled tightly to his chest. Beside him is his squad leader, an older, gentle man named Stefan. Stefan reaches into his tunic and pulls out a tiny, bruised apple he found on the edge of a ruined orchard days ago. It is withered and soft, but in the dark, it smells incredibly sweet. Stefan takes his pocket knife and carefully, blindly, cuts the small apple in half. He presses one piece into Klaus's hand. Eat slowly, Stefan whispers, his voice barely a breath against the rustling pines. Let the sweetness linger. It is a good night, Klaus. The air is cool. Try to close your eyes. Klaus takes a tiny bite, letting the sweet juice wet his dry tongue. It is a profound, beautiful moment of kindness in the pitch black. In a world where they feel entirely surrounded by hostile shadows, this small sharing of fruit is a reminder that compassion has not been completely swallowed by the woods. Klaus leans his head on Stefan's shoulder, finding a fleeting, desperate comfort in the steady rise and fall of the older man's breathing. He closes his eyes, and in the quiet sanctuary of his mind, he begins to write a letter to his father. Papa, he whispers internally, the words flowing softly in the dark. The woods here are so deep. They remind me of the black forest where we used to walk when I was little, but they do not feel kind. We are walking home, Papa, but the road is very long, and the trees seem to step in our way when we are not looking. I am trying to be brave. I am trying to keep my eyes on the path. But I am so tired of being afraid of the dark. Please leave the lantern on the porch for me. I need to know there is a light waiting at the end of these trees. In the deepest, quietest hour of the night, when the exhausted men have finally slipped into a fitful, shivering sleep, the forest gently shifts. Grigory and a few others move through the brush with the silent, fluid grace of wolves. They do not approach the sleeping men. They move toward the iron rails. With heavy, muffled wrenches and quiet, practiced movements, they begin to unbolt the heavy steel tracks. They work in perfect silence, removing the iron spikes that tie the rails to the earth, quietly severing the lifeline that points to the west. They set a small, carefully wrapped package of explosives beneath a wooden trestle bridge just a few miles down the line, lighting a slow-burning fuse before melting seamlessly back into the shadows of the ferns. Hours later, long before the dawn has even begun to lighten the sky, a sound rolls through the forest. It is not a deafening roar, but a deep, muffled thump that vibrates through the roots of the trees and trembles against the spines of the sleeping men. Klaus wakes with a start, his heart hammering against his ribs. He sits up, straining his eyes in the pitch black, listening to the echoes fading away through the timber. It is followed by the distant, tragic sound of twisting metal, a low, agonizing groan that carries clearly on the cool night wind. Beside him, Stefan lets out a long, heavy sigh. He does not need to see the broken bridge to know what that sound means. The trains will not be coming. The iron lifeline has been severed. The shadows have reached out and cut the road home. Go back to sleep, Klaus, Stefan whispers, his voice thick with a profound, unutterable exhaustion. We will just have to walk a little further tomorrow. The emotional deflation that washes over the men in the dark is heavier than the damp night air. The paranoia is suddenly justified, replaced by a quiet, crushing despair. They realize they are entirely trapped in a slow, agonizing race against the vastness of the land itself. The earth is rejecting them, tearing up its own roads to keep them walking, forcing them to pay for every single mile with the blistered soles of their boots. Yet, even in this terrible realization, there is a strange, quiet resilience. They do not scream into the dark. They do not break down in panic. They simply pull their woolen coats tighter around their shivering shoulders and lie back down in the pine needles. They accept the broken rhythm of their retreat. If they must walk, they will walk. If the shadows follow them, they will simply refuse to look into the dark. As the first pale, gray light of the morning begins to filter down through the thick canopy of leaves, the forest slowly takes shape once more. The terrifying, formless shadows of the night resolve back into familiar trunks and green ferns. The birds begin to sing, a beautiful, innocent melody that seems completely at odds with the sorrow of the men rising slowly from the damp earth. Klaus stands up, his joints aching with a deep, persistent cold. He looks down at the iron rails stretching out beside him, knowing now that they lead only to twisted metal and empty air. He turns away from the tracks and looks at the men gathering around him. Their faces are pale, their uniforms torn and stained, but they are standing. They are still breathing. Stefan adjusts the heavy straps of his canvas pack and gives Klaus a gentle, reassuring nod. They fall into step beside one another, their boots crunching softly on the gravel. They walk forward into the mist, moving slowly, deliberately, a procession of weary ghosts seeking the edge of the woods. The ancient forest watches them go, silent and immensely patient. The unseen partisans retreat deeper into the green, their quiet work finished for the day. The retreat continues, a long, heartbreaking journey through a world that whispers from the shadows, carrying the tired boys ever so slowly toward a home that feels further away with every step they take. There is a profound, humbling silence that falls over an army when the roar of its engines is finally swallowed by the soft, forgiving earth. The sky above the sprawling steppe, which for so long had burned with the fierce, unblinking glare of the summer sun, has slowly turned the color of bruised iron. The dry, breathless heat that had baked the plains into a pale crust gently breaks, giving way to a cool, heavy wind that smells deeply of crushed pine needles and distant oceans. And then, the rain begins. It does not fall with the violent, tearing anger of a thunderstorm. It falls with a slow, sweeping sorrow. It is a steady, relentless, whispering rain that descends like a vast, gray curtain over the retreating lines. It washes the fine, choking dust from the air, pulling it down into the soil, turning the cracked, thirsty ground into a dark, shimmering mirror of the sky. But the earth, having been torn and scarred by weeks of iron treads and marching boots, does not drink the rain. It churns it. Within hours, the hard dirt roads dissolve. They melt into a thick, black, clinging paste. It is a mud so profound, so heavy, that it seems to possess its own quiet, ancient will. It wraps itself around the wheels of the great supply wagons. It fills the gaps in the heavy steel tracks of the slumbering tanks. It acts as a great, silent equalizer, stripping away the blinding speed and the terrifying power of the invading army, reducing them all to the slow, agonizing pace of a human footstep. Let us stand in the gentle rain beside a young driver named Anselm. For months, Anselm's entire world has been the cramped, sweltering cabin of his transport truck. He has loved his machine. He has spent countless nights in the dark, his hands black with grease, coaxing its engine to life, binding its wounded hoses with rags and wire. His truck was his sanctuary, his fortress against the terrifying vastness of the plains. But today, the earth has claimed it. The thick, dark mud has risen above the axles. Anselm sits in the driver's seat, his hands resting lightly on the steering wheel, listening to the rain drum softly against the metal roof. The engine is silent. The fuel is gone, and even if it were not, the wheels are hopelessly, permanently trapped in the deep clay. Anselm does not feel anger. He only feels a deep, sweeping exhaustion. He reaches out and gently pats the dashboard, a quiet, tender farewell to the iron companion that had kept him safe for so long. He gathers his small canvas satchel, steps out of the cabin, and drops down into the mud. It instantly swallows his boots, rising halfway up his shins. The cold moisture seeps through his woolen trousers. He turns his back on the machine, leaving it behind in the gray mist like a monument to a forgotten time, and he begins to walk. He joins the long, winding river of men moving slowly down the dissolving road. The transformation is complete. The mechanized titans of the summer have become a quiet procession of weary pilgrims. The pride of the empire has been brought low, forced to bow its head to the rain and march on blistered, aching feet. The physical toll of walking through this thick, clinging earth is almost impossible to describe. Every single step is a battle. The mud acts like a heavy, unseen hand, grabbing the soles of their boots, demanding a tremendous, exhausting effort just to pull the foot free. When the boot releases, it makes a soft, wet, sucking sound. Multiply that sound by 100,000 men, and it becomes the new, mournful heartbeat of the retreat, a slow, rhythmic, agonizing cadence echoing through the misty rain. Walk beside a young infantryman named Elias. He is a farm boy, used to long days in the fields, but his body is slowly breaking under the weight of the endless march. His heavy leather boots, which had been so stiff and proud when he left his village, are now soaked completely through. The wet leather rubs mercilessly against his heels and his toes. The blisters had formed days ago, rising like angry red fires against his skin, and now they have burst. With every step Elias takes, a sharp, breathtaking spike of pain shoots up his leg. Yet, he does not stop. He does not cry out. He simply bites his lower lip, bows his head against the falling rain, and watches the muddy back of the man walking directly in front of him. There is a strange, quiet humility in this shared suffering. The officers walk beside the privates. The mechanics walk beside the cooks. The mud does not care about rank or titles. It pulls at them all with the exact same, indifferent gravity. The grand illusions of invincibility have been entirely washed away by the rain, leaving only the raw, undeniable truth of their own fragile humanity. Beside Elias walks an older sergeant named Dieter. Dieter's face is deeply lined, hidden beneath the dripping brim of his canvas cap. He sees the slight, agonizing limp in Elias's step. He watches the young boy's shoulders tremble with the sheer effort of pulling his boots from the clay. Dieter steps out of the line and walks toward the edge of the ruined road, where a small, shattered grove of birch trees stands in the mist. He searches the wet ground until he finds a thick, sturdy branch that has fallen in the wind. He pulls his pocketknife from his coat and, walking slowly to catch back up with the column, begins to strip the wet bark from the wood. He smooths the knots, shaping it with the practiced, steady hands of a father carving a toy for a son. When the wood is smooth, Dieter moves quietly beside Elias. He does not speak. He simply holds out the carved walking stick. Elias looks at the stick, and then up at Dieter's tired, kind eyes. The young boy reaches out with a trembling, mud-stained hand and takes it. He leans his weight onto the wood, and for the first time in hours, the sharp, blinding pain in his heels lessens just a fraction. It is a tiny piece of wood, but in this endless ocean of mud, it is a lifeline. Elias gives a small, breathless nod of profound gratitude. Dieter nods back, falling into step beside him. They walk together, their shoulders occasionally brushing in the rain, bound tightly by a quiet, unspoken love that only men who have suffered together can truly understand. To survive the physical agony of the long march, the men must learn to detach from their own bodies. They must send their minds far away, leaving their exhausted shells to carry on the mechanical, rhythmic labor of walking. The column becomes a moving sanctuary of hidden memories and whispered dreams. Anselm, the driver who left his beloved truck behind, walks with his eyes half closed. The rain washes the engine grease from his face, running in pale, dark streaks down his cheeks. He is not looking at the mud. In his mind, he is walking down the narrow, cobblestone street of his hometown in Bavaria. He can feel the hard, clean stones beneath his shoes. He can smell the sweet, yeasty aroma of the bakery on the corner. He imagines the soft, warm glow of the gas lamps flickering to life as the evening settles over the quiet town. He is writing a letter in his mind, speaking the words softly to the rhythm of his footsteps. "My dearest Clara," he whispers to the rain. "I am walking home to you. The road is very long, and the earth is so heavy, but every step I take brings me closer to your door. I had to leave my machine behind in the dark. I am sorry for that. But I am bringing myself back to you. My hands are empty, my uniform is torn, and I am so very tired. But my heart is still beating. Please keep the fire lit. Please wait for me in the window." The beautiful, tragic irony of the retreat is that as the army loses its strength, its machines, and its pride, the men themselves become profoundly more human. Stripped of their armor, they rely entirely on the gentle mercies of one another. They share the last, stale crumbs of their rations, pressing small pieces of hard bread into the hands of those who are faltering. They offer a shoulder to lean on when the mud becomes too deep. They speak in soft, encouraging whispers, their voices blending with the gentle shushing of the rain. They are no longer a terrifying wave of conquest. They are just a long, meandering line of boys, lost in a vast and lonely world, trying desperately to help each other survive the long walk home. As the afternoon slowly fades into evening, the gray light of the misty sky deepens into a bruised, melancholic twilight. The rain softens to a fine, silver drizzle that hangs suspended in the cool air. The landscape around them is empty, a vast, rolling nothingness of wet grass and dark soil. Finally, word passes down the line, a soft murmur traveling from the front of the column to the back. They are stopping for the night. There are no dry beds waiting for them. There are no warm tents. They simply step off the ruined, muddy road and walk into the tall, wet grass of a gentle hillside. They cannot light fires, the wood is soaked, and the enemy is always watching in the dark. They drop their heavy canvas packs onto the wet earth. They do not have the strength to dig trenches. They simply sink down into the soft, yielding grass, letting the exhaustion finally overtake them. They pull their damp woolen coats tightly over their heads, curling their bodies into small, tight knots to preserve whatever fragile warmth they have left. Elias sits on his pack, his back resting against Dieter's. The older sergeant is already asleep, his breathing slow and rhythmic against Elias's spine. Elias reaches down and carefully, agonizingly, unlaces his soaked leather boots. He slips them off his ruined feet, letting his skin breathe the cool, damp air of the evening. It is a small, brilliant moment of pure, physical relief. He holds the carved walking stick across his lap, running his thumb over the smooth wood. He looks out over the dark, quiet hillside. Thousands of men are resting in the grass, completely silent, blending perfectly into the shadows of the earth. The rain falls softly upon them, a gentle, washing baptism that cleanses the sorrow of the day. Elias closes his eyes. He listens to the wind moving through the wet reeds. He listens to the quiet, steady beating of his own heart. The mud has taken their machines, it has taken their pride, and it has broken their bodies. But it has not taken their spirits. They have survived another day. They have walked through the deep, pulling earth, and they have held on to one another. The night is cold, and tomorrow will bring more of the same, heavy earth. But for now, wrapped in the quiet, misty embrace of the Russian twilight, they are allowed to stop. They are allowed to sleep. And in their dreams, the mud finally washes away, leaving only the clean, hard roads that lead them gently, safely, back to the places they love. When the thunder finally rolls away, the earth does not remember the roar of the guns, she remembers the fragile, paper secrets left behind in the dark. The great, moving tide of the armies has finally receded, drawing back across the horizon and leaving the vast Russian steppe to its ancient, unbroken silence. The dust has settled. The heavy, suffocating smoke has been washed away by the gentle summer rains, leaving the sky a brilliant, aching expanse of clear and endless blue. If you were to walk through this sweeping landscape now, stepping softly through the tall, nodding stalks of the wild grass, you would find a world suspended in a strange, melancholic peace. It is a museum of ghosts, a quiet gallery of shadows carved directly into the soil. Beneath the gently rolling hills, hidden from the wind, lie the abandoned dugouts. They are deep, earthen rooms, framed with rough-hewn timber and smelling sweetly of damp clay and exposed pine roots. Just hours ago, these small, subterranean sanctuaries were filled with the terrified, exhausted breathing of young men. They were filled with the sharp scent of gun oil, the bitter tang of cheap tobacco, and the desperate, whispered prayers of boys who were trying to hold the world together in the dark. Now, they are entirely empty. But when an army leaves in a sudden, quiet rush, retreating into the mist or advancing toward the next terrible dawn, they cannot carry everything with them. They take the heavy things, the iron things, the things required for survival. What they leave behind are the light things, the fragile things, the deeply, profoundly human things. Step carefully down the dirt stairs of a German bunker. The golden afternoon light filters down through the open doorway, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the quiet air. Resting on a makeshift table, fashioned from an overturned ammunition crate, is a small, dented tin cup. Beside it sits a pocketknife, its blade still open, resting next to a half-carved piece of pale wood that was slowly becoming the shape of a sleeping hound. And there, caught in a tiny, gentle draft of air, a piece of paper flutters softly against the dirt wall. It is a letter. The edges are frayed, and the paper is soft from the humidity of the underground air. The handwriting is beautiful, sloping and precise, written with a dull graphite pencil. The boy who wrote it was named Johannes. He was writing to his mother in a small, quiet village nestled in the green valleys of Bavaria. He did not have time to fold it. He did not have time to tuck it into an envelope before the whispered order to move was passed down the line. Let us sit in the quiet beam of light and listen to the voice he left behind. My dearest mother, the letter begins, the words carrying the gentle, reassuring cadence of a son trying to protect the woman who gave him life. The sky here is so incredibly large. I have never seen a sky like this. At night, there are so many stars that they look like a river of crushed diamonds spilled across the dark. I am safe, Mother. Please do not let worry keep you awake. I sit in the quiet hours and I think of your kitchen. I can almost smell the cinnamon and the warm dough of the bread you bake on Sunday mornings. The scent of it feels more real to me than the dirt walls of this room. We are waiting for the summer to end. Keep my room exactly as it was. I will be walking up the garden path before the first snow falls. Johannes left his courage on that table. He left his beautifully constructed lie, his gentle shield of words, resting in the silence. The letter will never reach the green valleys of Bavaria. The mother will never read about the river of crushed diamonds. But the words are not lost. They have simply been offered to the earth, a quiet testament to a love that was stronger than the fear of the dark. Walk further across the open steppe, stepping lightly over the rusted coils of wire that are already being swallowed by the creeping green vines of the summer weeds. On the other side of the valley, in a shallow, winding trench carved by the tired hands of the Soviet defenders, there is another forgotten sanctuary. The trench is slowly filling with brown, muddy water from the recent rains. Resting on a narrow ledge of packed clay, perfectly safe from the rising puddle, sits a small, rusted tin box. The lid is slightly ajar. Inside, wrapped carefully in a scrap of oiled canvas to protect it from the damp, is a small, leather-bound notebook. This notebook belonged to an older soldier, a farmer named Lev, whose hands were thick and calloused long before he ever picked up a rifle. His handwriting is bold, heavy, and deeply pressed into the fragile pages. He was not writing to a mother. He was writing to his wife, a woman who was waiting for him in a wooden house surrounded by fields of golden wheat. "My sweet Anya," Lev's imagined voice whispers from the pages, deep and resonant, like the sound of the wind moving through a dense forest. "Today the rain fell, and it smelled exactly like the fields behind our house just after we turned the spring soil. For a moment, with my eyes closed, I was not a soldier. I was standing beside you, holding your hand, watching the storm roll in over the mountains. I found a small blue beetle yesterday, crawling along the edge of the trench. It was so bright and perfect. It reminded me of the one our little boy caught in a glass jar last summer. I watched it walk into the grass, and I prayed that it would find its way home. I am holding on to the memory of your face, Anya. It is the only light I need in this dark place. When the wheat is tall again, I will be there to harvest it with you." Lev's notebook is a diary of the small, miraculous things. In the midst of the most terrifying, mechanical storm the world had ever produced, he was looking at blue beetles. He was smelling the rain. He was desperately anchoring his soul to the gentle rhythms of the natural world, refusing to let the war turn his heart to iron. The wind catches the open page, turning it softly with a papery rustle, leaving Lev's quiet devotion echoing in the empty trench. These forgotten letters are everywhere. They are tucked into the crevices of the timber walls. They are folded into the pockets of heavy woolen coats that were left hanging on wooden pegs. They are lying in the crushed grass, their ink slowly running and blurring from the morning dew, turning the words into soft, watercolor smears of blue and black. Some of the letters are unfinished, a single, heartbreaking sentence cut short by the sudden, terrifying roar of the reality they were trying to ignore. In a field of towering sunflowers, where the golden heads bow heavily toward the soil, a single, crumpled piece of paper rests in the dirt. It is stained with the dark, powdery dust of the plains. The handwriting is hurried, frantic, driven by a sudden, overwhelming emotion. "My beautiful Clara," the unfinished letter reads. "The waiting is the hardest part. I have carried your photograph in my breast pocket until the edges have worn soft as felt. Tonight, the wind smells like the pine trees behind your father's house. If I could only touch your hand one more time, just for a single second, I know I would not be afraid of." And there, the graphite stops. The sentence hangs in the air, a suspended breath, an eternity trapped in a single, unwritten word. Perhaps the order came to march. Perhaps the dawn broke, bringing the fire with it. The ending of the letter does not matter. The beauty lies in the attempt. In his final, quiet moment of waiting, this unknown boy chose to fill his mind with the scent of pine trees and the memory of a girl's hand. He chose love over terror. It is not just paper that litters the quiet steppe. The abandoned dugouts are filled with the silent, physical echoes of the men who lived in them. There is a small, silver harmonica resting on a sandbag, its metal polished bright by the constant, nervous rubbing of a thumb. You can almost hear the faint, melancholic notes of a folk song drifting from it, the breathless music of a boy trying to drown out the silence of the night. There is a small shaving mirror, cracked down the center, leaning against a dirt wall. For weeks, it reflected the tired, soot-stained faces of men growing older by the hour. Now, it reflects only the slow, beautiful arc of the sun as it crosses the sky, and the gentle swaying of the tall grass at the edge of the trench. There are wooden pipes with the bowls burned black. There are half-knitted socks, sent from distant ants, the wool unraveling slowly in the damp air. There are small, smooth stones, picked up from riverbeds thousands of miles away, carried as talismans in deep pockets, and finally left behind in the foreign clay. Every single object is a story. Every discarded item is a heavy, quiet ghost. They strip away the grand, sweeping narratives of empires and generals, leaving only the profound, agonizing humanity of the individual. They remind us that the armies were not made of steel and ideology, they were made of boys who missed their mothers. They were made of farmers who missed their wives. They were made of young men who simply wanted to live long enough to finish a sentence to a girl named Clara. As the late afternoon sun dips lower on the horizon, painting the steppe in deep, bruised shades of violet and rich, golden amber, the evening wind begins to rise. It moves softly across the plains, whispering through the dry stalks of the sunflowers and rustling the tall reeds. The wind sweeps down into the empty dugouts. It lifts the frayed edges of Johannes's letter. It gently turns the damp pages of Lev's notebook. It catches the unfinished note to Clara, lifting it from the dirt and carrying it up into the golden air. The wind becomes the final, merciful postmaster of the steppe. It carries the words out of the dark trenches and lifts them into the vast, open sky. The whispered promises, the quiet fears, the desperate declarations of love, they are all released from the earth, mingling together in the cool evening air. They belong to no nation now. They belong to no army. They are simply human voices, returning to the silence of the world. Nature is a slow, forgiving healer. The autumn will soon arrive, bringing the heavy rains that will wash the dirt walls of the dugouts until they collapse. The winter snows will fall, a pure, white blanket that will cover the rusted tins, the broken mirrors, and the silver harmonicas. And when the spring returns, the wild grass will grow taller, thicker, and greener than before, entirely hiding the scars of the summer. The earth will reclaim it all. But the memory of the men who sat in the dark and wrote these words will remain, preserved in the gentle sigh of the wind and the quiet beauty of the setting sun. So let us leave them here, resting peacefully in the shadows of the steppe. Let us honor the letters left behind, the fragile paper boats of hope that never reached their shores. Close your eyes and listen to the soft, rhythmic rustle of the grass. It is the sound of 100,000 voices, finally free from the fear, whispering their love to the endless, beautiful sky. Sleep well, knowing that in the end, it is not the thunder of the war that echoes through eternity, but the quiet, unbreakable resilience of the human heart. There is a subtle, heartbreaking moment when the wind forgets the warmth of summer and first learns the language of the frost. The vast, rolling expanse of the Russian steppe has begun to slowly, quietly change its clothes. The endless, blinding days of the sweltering sun have gently slipped away, retreating behind a veil of thin, high clouds. In their place comes a new, much paler light. The sky, once a brilliant, aching blue, now takes on the soft, bruised color of polished slate and dull iron. The heavy, suffocating heat that pressed down upon the men like a physical weight just weeks ago has evaporated. It is replaced by a crisp, biting chill that sweeps across the open, desolate plains long before the sun even touches the horizon. This early chill is a beautiful, terrifying thing. It transforms the battered world into a landscape of silver and glass. In the deepest, quietest hours of the night, while the exhausted men try to sleep in the shallow hollows of the earth, the moisture in the air slowly descends. It settles upon the tall, bruised stalks of the wild grass, turning them into delicate crystal wands. It rests upon the heavy wool of threadbare coats, and it coats the cold, sleeping iron of the broken machines they must leave behind. When the morning finally breaks, pale and hesitant, the entire world glitters with a fine, white dusting of frost. But this frost brings more than just a change in the season. It brings a profound, quiet realization that settles deeply into the hearts of the retreating forces. The summer was a time of fire, of movement, of a desperate, terrifying hope. Now, as the men step backward, leaving their dreams buried in the ash and the mud, the cold reality of their situation perfectly mirrors the freezing earth beneath their boots. The illusion of a swift, glorious victory has evaporated into the mist. The tide has not just turned, it has frozen over. Let us walk beside a young infantryman named Lucas. He is marching westward, his back turned permanently toward the rising sun. His uniform, which felt so heavy and stifling during the long days of July, now feels terrifyingly thin against the biting wind. He pulls his frayed collar up around his neck, burying his chin in the rough fabric, trying to trap whatever fragile warmth his body can still produce. His breath plumes in the air before him, creating small, white clouds that appear and vanish with the slow, dragging rhythm of his footsteps. Lucas looks down at the earth. The deep, treacherous mud that had swallowed their vehicles just days before has now hardened into sharp, jagged ridges of frozen clay. Every step he takes requires a conscious, agonizing effort. His boots, worn thin and full of holes, offer almost no protection against the unyielding ground. The cold seeps entirely through the leather, aching deep within his bones, turning his toes completely numb. Yet, he continues to walk. He does not march with the proud, rhythmic cadence of a conqueror. He shuffles with the quiet, desperate endurance of a survivor. As the temperature slowly drops day by day, the psychological weight of the retreat grows far heavier. To walk toward a victory is to be carried by the wind. To walk toward a defeat, across an ocean of hostile, freezing earth, is to pull the entire weight of the world upon your shoulders. Lucas looks at the men walking silently beside him. Their faces are drawn, their eyes hollow, their skin pale beneath the dirt and the soot. They are an army of weary ghosts, wandering through a frozen purgatory, bound together only by the shared, silent terror of the coming winter. In the late afternoon, as the shadows grow incredibly long and the cold begins to bite with a renewed, vicious sharpness, the column comes to a halt in a small, sheltered ravine. They cannot build fires. The thick smoke would draw the eyes of the enemy, and the dry wood of the summer is gone, replaced by damp, freezing timber. The men must find their warmth entirely in each other. They sit in tight circles, pressing their backs together, wrapping their arms around their knees, becoming islands of shared breath in a sea of frost. Beside Lucas sits an older medic named Elias. Elias has seen too much suffering, too much brokenness, but his eyes still hold a gentle, unwavering kindness. He reaches into his canvas satchel and pulls out a single, crumpled pair of thick woolen socks. They are a precious treasure, saved for the absolute darkest moment. Elias looks at the young boy sitting next to him, a new recruit who is shivering so violently that his teeth are chattering. Without a single word, Elias leans over, gently unties the boy's ruined boots, and slips the thick, warm wool over the boy's freezing feet. It is a tiny, invisible act of heroism. In a world that has been stripped of all comfort, where survival depends on hoarding every meager resource, to give away your warmth is to give away a piece of your own life. The young boy looks up at Elias, his eyes shining with unshed tears, and whispers a breathless word of thanks. Elias simply smiles, a tired, beautiful curve of his lips, and pulls his own thin coat a little tighter around his shoulders. He knows that the true battle is no longer against the men across the valley. The true battle is against the cold, and against the creeping despair that threatens to freeze their humanity completely. As the evening deepens, the frost begins to reclaim the landscape once more. It creeps over the abandoned artillery pieces that litter the edge of the ravine, turning the terrifying weapons into harmless, beautiful sculptures of white ice. The machines of war look so incredibly small now, so completely powerless against the vast, ancient turning of the seasons. The earth is indifferent to their struggles, indifferent to their borders and their grand ambitions. The earth only knows that it is time to sleep. Elias leans his head back against the frozen dirt wall of the ravine and closes his eyes. He is not sleeping, it is far too cold for true sleep. Instead, he is traveling inward, retreating to the quiet, warm places he preserves carefully in his memory. He imagines he is sitting by the hearth in his grandfather's house, watching the bright orange flames dance over the split logs. He can feel the radiant heat on his face. He can smell the rich, smoky scent of the burning wood and the sweet aroma of roasting apples. In this mental sanctuary, Elias begins to compose a letter to his wife, a letter he may never have the chance to write on paper. "My dearest Clara," his silent voice whispers into the dark. The frost has come to the plains. It paints the tall grass in silver, and it makes the night air sharp to breathe. We are walking away from the fire now, walking back toward the setting sun. The road is so incredibly long, Clara, and the earth has grown as hard as iron beneath our feet. But please know that I am carrying the warmth of your smile inside my chest. When the wind is the cruelest, I close my eyes and I see you standing in the doorway, waiting for me. That image is the only fire I need to keep moving. I will endure this winter, my love. I will put one foot in front of the other until I find my way back to your arms. This is the quiet endurance of the defeated. It is a slow, methodical courage. It is not celebrated in sweeping histories or carved into grand stone monuments. It is found only in the silent, agonizing effort required to simply stand up in the freezing dawn. It is found in the choice to keep walking, mile after endless mile, when every muscle in your body screams for you to simply lie down in the beautiful, soft frost and surrender to the sleep. They are propelled not by the glory of an empire, but by the desperate, fragile hope of returning to a distant, quiet home. The night stretches on, an eternity of shivering and silence. The stars above are a brilliant, terrifying canopy of scattered ice. They are incredibly beautiful, but they offer absolutely no warmth, only a cold, indifferent light that casts long, pale shadows across the frozen earth. The men huddle closer together, a fragile, breathing monument to survival in the middle of a freezing ocean. They listen to the wind as it sweeps through the ravine, a low, mournful howl that sounds like the voice of the winter itself, whispering its arrival to the empty plains. But even in this profound darkness, there is a quiet, poetic grace. To look at these men is to see the absolute limits of human resilience. They have been broken, they have been defeated, they have been abandoned by the summer and betrayed by the earth. Yet, they are still breathing. They are still holding onto each other in the dark. They are still preserving the tiny, beautiful sparks of their own humanity against the crushing weight of the cold. When the morning finally arrives, it will bring no comfort. The frost will only be thicker. The frozen ruts in the dirt road will be sharper. The journey ahead will only grow longer and more bitter. But for now, in the deepest, quietest hour of the night, they are allowed to rest. They are allowed to exist entirely in the present moment, shielded by the darkness and the shared warmth of the men breathing softly beside them. Let us leave them here, resting quietly under the frost. Let us honor the incredible, quiet strength it takes to simply survive the turning of the season. Listen to the soft, rhythmic sound of their breathing, a gentle, defiant melody against the profound silence of the frozen earth. The frost has settled on the horizon, but the fire in their hearts, though dim and flickering, has not yet gone out. Sleep well, weary travelers. The night is cold, but you are not alone. Let the quiet stars watch over you, and let the gentle dream of a warm home carry you safely through the frost. There is a profound and gentle mercy in the way the earth eventually forgives the terrible trespasses of men. The great, roaring summer storm has finally passed. The massive armies, with their millions of marching boots and their thousands of heavy, iron machines, have withdrawn from the vast, rolling plains of the Russian steppe. They have carried their banners, their exhaustion, and their immense sorrows far away to other distant horizons, leaving the quiet, battered landscape entirely alone. The silence that settles over the world now is not the anxious, breathless quiet that preceded the battle. It is not the terrifying pause of a gathered breath before a shout. It is a deep, eternal, and peaceful exhale. It is the sound of a wounded world finally being allowed to rest. If you were to stand in the center of the steppe in the days just after the departure, you would see a landscape completely broken. The earth was torn open, deeply scarred by the miles of winding trenches, the massive, jagged craters of the artillery, and the heavy, crushing tracks of the armored beasts. The wild, green grass had been burned away, replaced by a fine, powdery ocean of gray ash and pulverized clay. It looked as though the world had ended, as though the soil itself had been permanently stripped of its ability to harbor life. But the earth is infinitely patient, and it possesses a quiet, unbreakable resilience that rivals even the bravest of the boys who fought upon it. As the late summer bleeds into autumn, the healing slowly begins. The heavy, dark clouds gather once more, but they do not rain fire. They release long, gentle showers of cool, clean water. The rain falls for days, washing the thick, black soot from the leaves of the surviving birch trees. It fills the deep artillery craters, turning the violent scars into small, placid pools of water that perfectly reflect the gray and violet skies. The rain washes the lingering scent of smoke and cordite from the air, replacing it with the ancient, sweet perfume of damp earth and decaying leaves. Then comes the winter. The Russian winter is a fierce and formidable thing, but to the torn steppe, it arrives as a profound and beautiful blessing. The snow begins to fall, drifting down in heavy, silent flakes that catch the pale moonlight. It falls for weeks, building a thick, pristine blanket of brilliant white over the entire world. The snow hides the rusted tangles of barbed wire. It softens the sharp, aggressive edges of the abandoned dugouts. It covers the broken, sleeping machines in deep drifts, wrapping the iron in a freezing, protective cocoon. Underneath this heavy, silent sheet of ice, shielded from the wind and the eyes of the world, the earth goes to sleep. It rests in the dark, gathering its strength. When the spring finally returns, coaxing the sun higher into the sky, the true miracle of the steppe begins. The snows melt, sending thousands of tiny, clear streams running through the valleys. And from the dark, softened mud, the green returns. It starts as a faint, almost imperceptible hue across the hills, but it grows with a quiet, unstoppable determination. The wild grass pushes its way through the ash. The roots of the wildflowers stretch deep into the soil, finding nourishment in the very earth that had been turned and broken by the spades of the soldiers. The trenches, those deep, earthen corridors where young men had huddled in terror and shared their final whispered prayers, slowly begin to collapse. The gentle rains and the shifting of the roots soften the straight, rigid walls. The earth sighs, and the dirt gently slides inward, filling the hollow spaces. Within a few short years, the deep trenches become nothing more than shallow, rolling indentations in the ground, completely carpeted in thick, emerald grass. They become scars. But they are beautiful scars, green and vibrant, resting softly on the surface of the world. The grand, terrifying machines of war, too heavy to be pulled from the mud, are left behind to face the slow, relentless march of time. Without the hands of the weary mechanics to tend to them, the iron beasts surrender to the elements. The rain and the air begin their quiet work, turning the thick, impenetrable gray steel into brilliant shades of burnt orange, deep red, and soft, powdery brown. Rust is simply nature's way of digesting the war. It softens the metal, eating away the harsh edges until the machines look less like weapons and more like strange, natural formations of colored stone rising from the grass. And as the machines soften, life boldly reclaims them. A pair of small, brown field mice make a warm nest of dry grass deep inside a discarded canvas satchel left in the driver's compartment. A wild climbing vine, bearing tiny, delicate white flowers, slowly wraps itself around the long, silent barrel of a main gun, binding it securely to the earth. In the commander's cupola, where a young boy once stood with a pounding heart, surrounded by the deafening roar of the battle, a small songbird builds a nest of twigs and mud. Where there was once only a terrified silence, there is now the high, sweet sound of newly hatched life. The villagers slowly return to their homes. They walk out into the vast fields to begin the agonizing work of clearing the land for the harvest. As they plow the soil, the earth frequently yields the secrets it has been keeping. An old man, walking behind his plow horse, stops as the blade catches on something hard. He kneels in the fresh dirt and brushes the soil away with his calloused hands. He finds a small, smooth piece of pale wood, carved into the shape of a resting bird. It is the carving made by the young German soldier, Elias, during the long, suffocating hours of the waiting. The old man does not throw it away. He recognizes the gentle, careful work of human hands. He places the wooden bird in his pocket, takes it back to his modest wooden cabin, and sets it on his windowsill. It sits there in the sunlight, a quiet, profound honoring of a boy from a distant land who loved the same beautiful, fragile things. A woman, planting seeds in the shadow of a rusted transport vehicle, finds a small, tarnished silver button lying in the grass. She holds it in her palm, rubbing the dirt from the intricate crest stamped into the metal. She looks out over the rippling, golden ocean of the tall grass, and she thinks of the boy who wore the coat that held this button. She thinks of the mothers. Far away, thousands of miles to the west, in quiet villages nestled in the valleys of Bavaria and the deep forests of Saxony, and thousands of miles to the east, in the wooden houses of the Urals and the busy streets of Moscow, the mothers are looking out their windows. The letters have stopped coming. The grand announcements on the radio have faded into history. The reality has settled into their hearts, a cold, heavy stone of grief that they will carry for the rest of their lives. They know that their boys are not coming home. They know that they belong to the steppe now. But as these mothers look up at the night sky, they find a strange, melancholic comfort in the stars. They know that the very same stars are shining down over the wide, open plains of Russia. The steppe has become a vast, boundless cemetery, with no walls, no gates, and no borders. Beneath the beautiful, swaying canopy of the sunflowers, the boys from the west and the boys from the east are finally at peace. They are sleeping side by side in the dark, rich soil, united in the absolute stillness of the earth. The differences that brought them there, the uniforms, the languages, the terrifying ideologies, have all dissolved into the dust. They are simply children of the earth once more, held gently in the quiet embrace of the world. If you were to walk through the steppe today, on a warm, clear afternoon in July, you would not hear the ghosts of the battle. You would not hear the thunder of the artillery or the frantic, desperate commands whispered into throat microphones. You would hear the wind. It sweeps across the hundreds of miles of unbroken green, rustling the leaves of the wild sunflowers, creating a sound exactly like the gentle shushing of a mother putting a child to sleep. You would hear the crickets singing in the tall reeds, a steady, hypnotic rhythm that lulls the mind into a state of profound relaxation. You would hear the bees moving lazily from blossom to blossom, completely unbothered by the history buried inches beneath their delicate wings. The scars in the steppe remain, but they have lost their sorrow. They are a poetic testament to the incredible elasticity of the human spirit and the infinite, healing grace of the natural world. They remind us that no matter how fiercely the fires of human conflict may burn, no matter how deeply we tear the world apart in our fear and our pride, the earth will always endure. The grass will always return. The sun will always rise, casting its warm, golden light over the broken places until they are beautiful once more. The evening is drawing close now. The sun is dipping low on the western horizon, painting the sky in deep, breathtaking shades of bruised violet, soft lavender, and burning gold. The long shadows stretch across the rolling hills, filling the shallow indentations of the old trenches with a cool, inviting darkness. It is time to leave this place. It is time to let the steppe return to its quiet, eternal slumber. Take a deep, slow breath of the clean, cool air. Let the scent of the sweet grass and the damp earth fill your lungs. Hold it for a moment, feeling the peace of the vast, empty landscape settling deep into your bones. And as you breathe out, let go of the heavy history. Let go of the sorrow, the fear, and the noise of the world. The story is finished. The men have all gone home, or they have found their rest beneath the nodding sunflowers. The grand, terrible storm of the summer is nothing more than a whisper on the wind, a fading memory dissolving into the twilight. Close your eyes. Listen to the gentle, rhythmic rustle of the leaves. It is the sound of the earth breathing, a slow, steady lullaby that has played since the dawn of time, and will continue to play long after we are all gone. Rest now. The night is quiet, the stars are emerging to take their silent watch, and the world is finally, wonderfully, at peace. Good night.